And I'm sure there's still hundreds of tunnels there. And one of the American ways of countering those tunnels was to do arc light bombing raids where they'd get 9 or 11 aircraft, each carrying 32 tons of bombs, big 500-pounder and 1,000-pounder bombs, and in that softish earth, the bombs would bury themselves, 20 metres underground, explode and just cave in everything. And I had a real bad feeling about the day. And I went to the company aid post and I said, look, I don't think I can go out in this operation, I've got this, yada, yada. And the company commander said, bullshit, you're going. And I got shot that day. And I had this really bad feeling about that day. Some people get premonitions. And one of our big fears was running out of ammunition. So people used to carry as much ammo as they could. You'd throw away rations and go hungry to carry more ammunition. And everybody's scared. Let me tell you, everybody is really scared. Nobody wants to die, particularly, you're feeling a bit grotty, you're lying on the ground, you haven't had a tub for weeks, you're really cheesed off, you're tired, the mail hasn't come, and you think, I'd really like to die a bit better than this. Okay, well, my father was Royal Navy, my mother was Royal Air Force. They'd married before the Second World War. My father was at sea most of the time, as you can imagine, in England. He was at the Battle of the River Plate against the German, Graf's Bay. My mother used to pack parachutes for the air crew. Anyway, at the end of the war, England was really on its hind legs. There was no work, there was nothing. We had family in Canada, the US, Australia and South Africa, and thankfully we chose to come here. So we arrived here in the middle of 1949. I was 6, getting on for 7 years old. We moved into a house in Port Melbourne.
Why did you arrive at this decision that you wanted to join the army?
Stupid, I suppose. I'd just turned 20. I'd finished my apprenticeship. I was totally cheesed off with the mundane existence. I mean, it was fairly boring, even though there was these activities. I decided I wanted to travel and do something else, and the easy way was to join one of the armed forces.
So when you discovered that you were heading off for Vietnam, you said you had to look at a map and work out where the hell that was.
Well, I mean, there was a bit of a map on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald or whatever it was, and we said, oh yeah, and somebody said, oh yeah, that's where the French used to be. And within a couple of days, a team from the Intelligence Corps turned up, and they gave us historical briefings and what the French had done, what the Americans had done, what the situation was. And we were briefed that we were specifically going to protect the Bien Hoa airfield. It's a huge airfield complex, largest airfield in Southeast Asia, 10,000 feet long. So it's a pretty big strip, big 4-engine, B-52s used to land there. They never were based there, but they'd come in with engine pods missing and tail shot off and all that sort of stuff and land there. And it was also a big administrative centre. It had been started by the Japanese. The French had used it as a big regional administrative centre, and then the Americans had taken it over because of the facilities for their aircraft. And thank God for that. Plenty of air support made all the difference. Had we no air support, it would have been over in the first couple of days, I reckon.
So can you tell us a bit more about those briefings? I mean, you learned a bit about the history. What about sort of...
Oh, yeah, they even did. I mean, they brought along examples of the equipment the enemy was using and wearing. They even did a little play where this guy, all tarted up to look like a Viet, sort of came in with an AK, and they got blanks from somewhere, and he and everybody's going, oh! And did this big thing, and he walked around saying, "You people are fools. When you arrive up there, we will kill you all. You know, you are too soft, and you can't live in the swamps and the jungle." You know, big play acting thing. But they showed us films of things that had happened. The big deal then was Dien Bien Phu. That had only been 10 years before, 54, I think, something like that, 10 or 11 years before. You know, and they said, or the major point about it all was, these people are quite determined. You know, they'll move artillery in bits and pieces, or they'll drag it, they'll cut roads through the jungle and all this. Oh, yeah, okay. None of us ever realised, of course, at that point, you know, we're going to fight communists. And when we got there, we realised they were nationalists. And no way known you can beat nationalists on their own soil. But
so it was the sort of the domino theory.
Oh yeah,
expanded.
oh hell, we were going to go and we were going to save Australia from the yellow peril. Oh, no doubt about it. And you know, that's what was pushed into us all the time. If we don't stop them there, the next thing we know, we'll be fighting them in Darwin. You know, oh yeah, okay. It's amazing how gullible you can make people. Without a drink even.
So would your group, your mates have been your section, your platoon? Was it? Did you get to know many of the blokes outside of
the army?
Well, no, I'm talking about. Well, you sort of company, platoon,
look, once we were in Vietnam, you really didn't get to see people outside the company area. On average, if you were to take a fortnight block of 14 days, we were in the field for 12 days. You'd come in for 2 days, and basically you got in, you had a feed, you had a shower, you cleaned your weapons, you went and got rid of your old worn out boots and got new ones, went and got some new greens, repacked all your webbing and stuff so it was ready to go straight away again, refilled up with ammunition, and then if you could manage it, you put your head down, you went to sleep. You know, time in the field, a section is supposed to be 10 men. If you had 5 or 6, you were lucky. You've got to have 2 men awake at any one time, right through the night. If you're not, this is not doing patrols, this is just your security. 2 guys sitting behind a machine gun all night. If you've got 6 people, you know, you might get 4 hours a night sleep in 2 hours and 2 hours. So after 10 or 12 days, you're pretty tight. So basically all you wanted to do was sleep. And after repetitions of these fortnights, people were really starting to get worn out. And you know, it's not so bad when you're a young man and you're fit, and the army fostered all of that, and you bounce back fairly quickly. But sometimes all you really, I've seen blokes being offered leave. You can go to Saigon for the day. Have a bit of I&I. No thanks, I'll stay here and have a sleep. A bit amazed after a couple of months no leave, and the whole time there, people would have averaged maybe 10 days leave in the year. That was it. And you worked 7 days a week, and you basically could be called out 24 hours a day. I&I, intoxication and intercourse. Better than R&R.
Same thing in the end, isn't it?
Oh, rest and recuperation? Nah, hardly.
So where did you arrive? Whereabouts in Vietnam?
On the morning that we arrived, we were told, okay, we'll be coming up on the coast of Vietnam just about first light, just on about dawn. And the boat must have been just about sinking at the front because everybody on the boat was standing up at the front end of the flight deck. And it was all misty, and out of the mist came this mountain, Caps and Jark, down where the task force eventually set up and after our tour, and they set up the support base and the R&R centre down there at Vung Tau. Yeah. And we we gradually moved up on it. The mist cleared. A lot of people don't understand that in the tropics quite often you've got fog up until about 11 o'clock in the morning. It's so moist, and as soon as the sun comes up, all this mist is created and you get quite thick fogs. Anyway, that cleared away, and all sorts of American aircraft started flying around us. They were all having a good look at us. The Vietnamese army came out, the brown water fleet, all these patrol boats, they all came out and they all had a look at us, and they're all yelling out, "Up Dalai," Australian. We're going, "Yeah, g'day cobber, how you going?" And we all sort of hung around, and the typical army thing, I think we sat there till sort of the middle of the afternoon before they actually did something about getting us off the boat.
So was this a naval port, like a navy?
It's a sheltered anchorage, and there's no wharves or anything. The Sydney was anchored in off the coast, and to get us ashore, as I recall, you've got everything you own, and you're getting out a little hatch in the side of the boat and stepping onto an amphibious truck, and it's going up and down, and people are falling all over the place. Then they took us a couple of metres, and I mean a couple of metres. We had to get off the amphibious truck and onto a landing barge, and we're all going mutter, 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 mutter. It really was poorly organised. Anyway, we then, the landing barge went into shore, and it docked on what was essentially a boat ramp, dropped the front thing, and we walked ashore. And there was a bunch of Americans there who said, "Glad to see you guys," and yada yada. And we said, "Oh yeah," and we're eyeballing them, and they're all in these brand new, really flash-looking green fatigue uniforms and combat boots, jungle combat boots. They weighed about the same as a glove each. There's little caps and shoulder-holstered 45s, and really, and exotic patches all over them. We thought, oh yeah. And here we are in this really drab-looking, scungy-looking old uniform the Australian Army wears, or used to wear. Anyway.
Was this the dyed khaki uniform?
Yeah, being dyed green, yeah. And everything the Americans had was new. And we were in all this old equipment, and so they took us to these trucks, and they said, "We're going to put you on these trucks and take you to the airfield here. Then we're going to fly you up to Bien Hoa." Because it would be about 60 miles, I suppose, by road if you were going to go by road, and it's too risky to, you don't travel by road there, or you didn't travel by road there. Anyway, they put us in these trucks, these brand new diesel trucks. Australia, we were getting around in these clapped out old World War II thing, and drove us to the airport, and the driver, I can remember this bloke, he hopped in, really flashing the flash sunglasses, and he said, "We're really glad to see you blokes. Things are pretty desperate here." And I thought, there's about 800 of us all up. That's everybody. How desperate are these people? We figured out there was only about 10,000 US troops in country then. We were the first ground force unit in country. When we started realising it, we thought, this could get a bit iffy. But anyway, they drove us to the airfield. We hopped on these twin-engine transport planes, and they flew us up to Bien Hoa. At the other end, same sort of trucks, took us out to this rubber plantation where the grass was that high and all the rubber trees had been cut down and the stumps were that high. So you walked around in the grass barking your shins on these stumps all over. And they said, "This is your area. Dig in." So there we were. It was the start of the wet season. We no sooner arrived there, plonked your kit bag on the ground where the platoon sergeant had said, "You two, that's your hole. All you've got to do is get the dirt out of it. That's the direction we're expecting the enemy from. Dig in." Basically, as soon as he said that, it started raining. And it bucketed down. And that was our introduction to the place. Sopping wet. We spent the first night in a hole in the ground, or a half-dug hole in the ground that was half full of water. expecting 10-foot tall Asian monsters coming out of the scrub to chop us into little bits and eat us. Yeah,
Was there any fortification around the area?
not a thing. Not a thing. Just open paddocks where they'd cut down all the trees so that there was clear fields of fire. That was all. We basically, for the first week that we were there, was we dug in and we put up wire fences, put up barbed wire fences to keep them out. The Americans over on one side, they were about a kilometre away, and another American unit to our left about 500 metres, and we were sort of filling in a gap. That was our prime role, was to protect the airfield, to stop them from coming across the river, across the Domnai River, and having a go at the airfield, because that was our line of support. Basically, all the aircraft came from there, from Mickey Mouse Airlines up to C-130 Herc transports, all came from that one big airfield complex. In the first week we were there, they rocketed the airfield and destroyed about 30 aircraft parked in the parking area. And all they did, they just dig holes, put the rockets in, light the fuse at the end, and they zoom, off they go. I mean, you're shooting at a target the size of Central Business District in Melbourne, and all they had to do was land, and these are big rockets, as long as this room and that round. All they had to do was hit the ground and throw off a bit of shrapnel, and usually most modern aircraft take a bit of shrapnel like that, and they're, a lot of repairs to fix up. Very quickly the Americans built reinforced walls all around the place to park their aircraft in. So it was all fun.
So that was considered a very major attack, that one that happened in the first week? Or
just a harassment thing. We were concerned about people on the ground coming in. I mean, the Viets had conducted and did conduct while we're there and after, our tour, some very major assaults. The old human wave attacks, and they do them 3 o'clock in the morning in the bucketing down rain. What do you want to do if you're hoochied up somewhere in the bucketing down rain at 3 o'clock in the morning? You want to stay warm and dry and underneath your shelter. That's when they attack. And besides that, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's a bit hard for the aircraft to find the enemy. Or in those days it was. These days they've got infrared and night vision, passive night vision aids, but then we didn't. We had some starlight scopes, but they were fairly ineffective. So by night, Mr. Charles had the run of the place. And all you could, the best you could do was to have your defences so that you could keep him out of the area that you wanted to hold overnight.
So what form of defence did it defending the airbase take? What did you set up in the way of defence?
Well, every unit, and basically right around the airfield area, with the exception of more to the rear of that was the township of Bien Hoa, which is a fairly big provincial town. Each unit would dig its series of weapon pits where people could fight from if we were attacked. Out the front of us, we had multiple barbed wire fencing. That took a long time to set up. The Americans had minefields in front of them. We didn't have any mines out in front of us. We deemed that we didn't want to put mines in front of us. And we used to put standing patrols out. The Americans sometimes did and sometimes didn't. Part of our tactics is to put small patrols, say a kilometre out, 3 men, 4 men, 5 men maybe, and they sit on a likely approach route to your area. And the idea is that if somebody does approach and it is the enemy, you can fire 20 rounds and then run away back in and get on the radio and tell them. Causes the enemy to deploy, and if their navigation's not all that good, they might think they've actually bumped your position when they're still a kilometre away. And they might deploy and start doing the full attack, and it just confuses them. You also set up artillery and mortar defensive fire missions, where you'll fire a couple of rounds during daytime and make sure that they land in the area that you want. And then if you're out there with a standing patrol, for example, you've got a radio, and if things really get where there's a lot of enemy activity, you can get on the radio and simply say, fire mission 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is. It's already coded up. You don't have to give any instructions on how to aim at it or whatever. They just fire that mission onto that position that you've, that numeral target coding that you've given them. And it's all to do with prior planning and preparation. And if you do all of that and you think about, if I was him, how would I want to get in here and do something about it so that he can't, or so that it slows him down? Because, for example, people think barbed wire fences and minefields will stop them. They don't, and they're not intended to stop the enemy. They're intended to channel him into areas where you can deal with him with other weapons. And one of the big mistakes is people put in minefields. For example, the Australian Army put in a big minefield down at Nui Dat and then didn't observe it. You've got to have people observing things like that. And the enemy just came along. Maybe somebody stood on a mine. And they said, oh, there's obviously a minefield here. So they probed, lifted the mines, and then used them themselves somewhere else. So you've got to have, over obstacles, you must have somebody observing. And if the enemy is, a barbed wire fence, you can always cut through it. You can always put an explosive charge in it and blow it out of the way. You can always call artillery or mortar fire down onto it and blow it out of the way. So you've got to have people observing these things. We did, quite often the Americans didn't. The American camp was built like an old Roman camp. They got a bulldozer and bulldozed up earth all around it, like a big berm around it. So small arms fire from outside, and we could see the volleyball going up and down while they were playing volleyball, late in the afternoon. And we did things like half an hour before last light until half an hour after last light, we stood too. You put your webbing on, you got your loaded weapon in your hands, and you got in your pit and you waited. It's an ideal time for somebody to attack you. It also changes the routine from day to night in that case, because you do different things by day and night. By day you might only have one sentry, by night you have two. And in the morning, half an hour before first light, you do the same. Great time for an attack to happen. They attack while it's still dark, just as the sun's coming up. They've got light to reorganise and finish off the job with the rising sun without having to fire flares or whatever. So they're the dangerous times. They might go back to the Zulu Wars, but it still works. Now, we used to do that. The Americans quite often didn't. We used to do clearing patrols at the end of, in the morning, at the end of stand, or just before the end of stand 2, we would send a patrol out that would sweep right out in front in case somebody was lying doggo in the long grass or behind a tree or something close to our fence. Send a patrol around to clear it out. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were attached to the 173rd Airborne Brigade, which was an elite unit. But from recruit to trained paratrooper, 12 weeks. They're full from civilian to paratrooper in 12 weeks. And then they were zotted off overseas. Our guys had better, I believe, better training. Simple things like all our soldiers loved knowing where they were. They wanted to be informed. They wanted to know what was happening. And as a consequence, most of the soldiers had a map. Usually they're only issued to NCOs and officers. And most of our troops had a map, and they would practice their navigation. They all wanted to be NCOs eventually, so they'd practice their navigation. And we often would take an American out with us. And in one case, he said, saw this, one of the diggers checking this map, and he said, "You can read a map, can you?" "Yeah." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you some sort of special forces trained?" He couldn't believe that, and I mean, crikeys, you could learn map reading in a day. You really can. A bit more experience to make it work properly, but that's the way they were. I saw them destroy a truck because the truck was a diesel truck, and they sent out a mechanic to fix it. It had broken down, and he said, I don't know anything about diesel, I'm a petrol engine man. And they put a couple of pounds of PE on it and blew it in situ because they couldn't get it out before dark. So rather than let Mr. Charles scavenge bits off it or take the whole truck, they blew it up. But the difference between them and us in that regard is equipment was equipment. Helicopters, they almost crash land helicopters to get troops onto a position. They'd chop their way down through the trees with the rotor blades to take wounded out. Not the Royal Australian Air Force. You'd get on the radio and say, fetch dust off, get a medical evacuation. And if it was the Australian Air Force, they'd say, is the area clear? And while you're talking, they can hear small arms fire over the radio. Say, no, but we're pushing them back. No, we won't come in until it's clear. And you'd say, listen, Spider, I've got a man bleeding to death down here, And quite often an American would come up and say, I'll go and get him out. And that was a bit nasty, I reckon, a bit iffy. The Americans had a totally different approach to equipment. If a piece of equipment got destroyed, get another one. Certainly they had an accounting system, and if it had been lost or destroyed because of neglect or bad usage or something like that, then the person responsible would be punished for it, the same as in our army. But they didn't reserve equipment at the cost of maybe someone's life, whereas we seem to be very equipment conscious. And I thought that's a stupid way to go about it.
In that example with the dust off, does that mean that if the Americans came in a helicopter, they would be firing at the enemy as they were coming down to land to get the...
Oh, sometimes they would, yeah. It would depend on how much in contact the ground people were. Obviously the helicopter, a helicopter is an extremely vulnerable aircraft, particularly when it's almost on the ground and hovering, or it's stopped and it's actually landed on the ground. It is very vulnerable, and they don't like doing it, but they will take the risk to save people's lives. They'll take the risk to get ammunition into people who are desperately in need of ammunition. They wouldn't fly in to deliver rations or something. That can wait. But getting wounded out, getting reinforcements in, getting ammunition in, or getting equipment in that's desperately needed, they would fly those sort of missions.
We've heard people say that one thing they found about that was that, yes, the Americans would supply their patrols very well. They would fly supplies in almost daily. Yep. But one of the problems with that is that it alerted the enemy to their position.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you've got to trade off. For that sort of luxury, you've got to trade off some security.
Did you ever have an experience like that where...
Yeah, we were... It would depend on the area and the type of operation one. If we were on a battalion-size operation, the enemy knew you were there. It had to be down to a company or smaller, and you might get away with the enemy not knowing you were there. But pretty rare. Quite often they'd know you were in an area, but they might not know exactly where you were in that area, but they'd know that you were in there. Whereas with a battalion or bigger operation, it's a lot of people on the ground, they know where you are. So flying in helicopters doesn't really matter all that much. And when we got to operations like that, the Americans would fly in a hot meal for us every day. You'd get a hot meal every day rather than living on combat rations all the time. Some of the operations lasted for 30 days. You're out in the bush, bashing around in the bush, and it was a real pleasant change. And I mean, out of that 30 days, you may only get, for say 5 days, where you'd get a hot meal each day. And they'd fly in hot boxes, and you could send up half your section at a time, and they'd get a hot meal, or they'd take 2 mess tins and bring back for the, you'd keep 50% of your troops in their positions. Why not? How else are you going to resupply people on the ground when you need everything? Batteries, rations, ammunition, water. We were forbidden to drink the local water. You weren't supposed to drink any water that was in creeks, in paddies, out of taps, anything. You were supposed to only drink the water that was supplied through the system because they purified it all. So that had to be choppered in. Each man was consuming 2 gallons a day. So that's one of those big jerry cans for 2 blokes every day. That's a big logistic supply demand. They couldn't bring it in by roads in the areas that we're in. Either the road was A, non-existent, or B, you're just flaunting with disaster trying to use a road through an area that the enemy controlled. There were a couple of cases while we were there of that sort of thing happening, where they thought roads were secure and they weren't. There'd been some sort of explosive device buried under the middle of the road, and somebody sitting on a hillside with an old car battery, and as soon as a truck or an armoured personnel carrier went over it, touch the 2 things and bang, blow it up. There were 2 safe ways to move there, on foot and by helicopter, and anything else was a bit iffy.
So you did joint operations with the Americans?
With the Americans, yeah.
Were you under the command of the Americans, or how did it work?
We were, yeah. And in reality, I guess we were loaned to the American Army for the tour. Not many people know there was a battalion in Vietnam before the task force down at Nui Dat was established. The young fellow who comes here and does the plumbing work for me, ex-army apprentice, 9 years in the army. The army does its history lessons to these kids. The army apprentice joins at sort of 15. He said to me, "You're ex-army," and I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh, you go to Vietnam?" I said, "Yes, with 1RA on the first tour." He said, "What, at Nui Dat?" And I said, "No, up at Bien Hoa." He said, "The army never told us about that one. We were the first ground combat force in country." And you'd be surprised how many people don't know, never heard of it.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
There's no embarrassment about it or anything?
No. In fact, we acquitted ourselves. How does it go? What's the catchphrase? We were winning when I left. So, yeah, I really don't know why. Could be, maybe, we were the only regular army battalion that went to Vietnam. Every other unit that came after us was combination regular army and conscript. We had no conscripts.
So, being in that position with the Americans, where you were kind of loaned to them, how did that work? I mean, orders would have just filtered down, presumably, to you as a Lance Corporal, or did you have direct contact with someone of the same rank on the American team?
No, we operated as a battalion, as part of the brigade. And normally what would happen is that the brigade commander would be directed or devised that he was going to do an operation somewhere. He would call his battalion commanders in and say, "Okay, we are going to conduct an operation. Intelligence says that there is an enemy regiment or whatever operating in this map area. What I want is for your battalion, Jack, to put a cordon around there. Joe, I want your battalion to heli-land in this area and assault through and push them into the thing. And Joe or Fred, I want your battalion to come in second, heliborne, and secure that area at the helicopter pads. If we get in trouble, we've got somewhere to withdraw back through, a secured thing." The battalion commanders would go away, nut out what it is that they really had in detail, what they had to do. They'd call their company commanders in. Fred, Joe, Mick, give them all what they were going to do. They would go back, call in their platoon commanders. This is what we're going to do. And that works all the time. It's called an O group, an orders group. and that works right down to private soldier. The platoon commander, then me as a junior NCO, platoon commander would instruct me what I was going to do. I would then go back and tell all the soldiers in my group what we were going to do, so that they all knew. We used to use a system called SMMEAK, Situation, Mission, Execution, Administration, Logistics and Supply, something like that. All you had to do was follow the form and fill in the detail. That way it covered all the information that you needed to know to do it. And we used to do that twice a day. You would have orders, and even if, you might sit there and say, situation, enemy forces, no change. Friendly forces, A company is going to go and play football this afternoon. Mission, to sit here and hold this piece of ground for the next 2 days. Easy. And you do that usually straight after stand down in the mornings, after you received your orders, and just before you stood to at night. Tonight there'll be a patrol. Joe, your section again. You've got to go out and do a standing patrol at grid reference 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. And it's an amazing, wonderful way for information to go up and down. And at the end of it, any questions? And Private Jones would say, "Oh, I've got a sore foot." "Yeah? Well, what are you going to do about it?" "I'll talk to the doc." And so the next time you went up to company headquarters, we had a corporal medic with each company. I'd say, "My handicap has got a sore foot. What can you do about it?" "Oh, I'll come down and have a look at it." Or, "Leave him here for when you go out for that next patrol. Otherwise he's just going to be limping along, and the CSM will keep him here painting tents or something until you get back." And it all works. It really does. If we use that methodology in business in Australia today, we would be world beaters. And I know a couple of companies who tried it and couldn't get people to stick with it. But it works. Everybody knows what's happening. Everybody knows what they've got to do, and knows what their group's doing, and knows what the next big group and the next bigger group is doing. They know where the enemy are. They know what to expect. All invented by the Australian Army.
So that system worked with the Americans?
They have a similar system, yeah. I found it was a bit too broad-based. You couldn't get down to each individual. It was almost, we're going to go and do such and such, and the troops would sort of drag along. Ours even went down to, when we go through this thick scrub, we'll have to break into single file. As soon as we come out the scrub on the other side, we'll move out an extended line, because we've got to cover 50 metres of open ground, and there may be enemy on the other side. If we're in single file, we're too much of a target. That sort of detail. And sometimes you might even make a dirt model on the ground and say, there is a village here, we're going to come through here, we're going to travel on this side of this road down through here, then we're going to set up a little firm base on this crossroads here, and then you, Joe, and your slovenly mate Harry are going to nick around the back there and make sure that nobody escapes out the back when we sweep through this little hamlet. And you do it all on a thing on the ground. Or you've got a map and you say, check this, and grid ref, and all the junior people, or the diggers, if they've got maps, they'll have a look at on their map and mark it up. And I guess it's very much like today. Everybody wants to be on the internet to find out what's going on, information. These days the armies have got maybe better methods where, they've got everybody wearing a helmet with a little radio in the helmet. They're actually looking at a little vision thing that sits in front of your eye, and you can look around it, so it doesn't interfere with your normal vision, but it can superimpose information so that you can read it. And of course it's got an audio coming in through your helmet, so and you can actually ask for information. All of that sort of stuff. They're just better methods, or more complicated methods of sending and receiving information. The only problem with all that modern technology is, what do you do when the batteries go flat?
That's right, it does break down.
But no, that all worked, and it's surprising how you can move large bodies of people with a great deal of control through a hostile landscape.
So I'm just trying to get an idea of those early days when you first arrived. I mean, I know you've covered a lot of territory, excuse the pun, but just to get I guess a sense of how different it was for you and the scale of it for you personally.
Yeah. It was really
Do you know
quite
what I mean?
overpowering. Yeah, we were quite small wheels in a big machine. Really. When the first couple of weeks was sort of localised, and you got used to, the ground is hard, and watch out for these clumps of leaves stuck together in the bushes because they're full of bloody red ants and they'll eat the hell out of you. Learning all those little nitty gritty things. Watch out for the little snakes that have got coloured bands around them because they've got enough poison to kill an elephant.
Can you find it
Yeah,
again?
well, once you get through the little nitty gritties, and Australian soldiers tend not to wear the issue equipment, so you sort of find out what's comfortable and what's not. So within the first few weeks, we're all wearing American boots that we borrowed, stolen, whatever. Not through the official system. You just got hold of them. You found a yank and said, "What size feet have you got?" Say, "Oh, 8. You say, "Beauty, got a spare pair of boots?" "Oh, sure, guy. Beauty, thank you." And things like our issue sleeping gear, they issued us with these blow-up airbeds. Bloody hopeless because they make a noise. They go flat all the time. So one of the prized possessions was to get a North Vietnamese Army hammock. To get an American poncho liner, lightweight poncho liner. It's like a quilty blanket thing, lightweight thing, very good. An Australian mosquito net, they were the best, and a Vietnamese hoochie. They didn't rattle. So you'd have a Vietnamese hoochie, Australian mosquito net, American blanket, and a NVA hammock. And people would, you'd accumulate that stuff fairly quickly because any mug can sleep rough in the bush. If you don't get as much rest as you can, it's your fault. So, you do those sort of things to accumulate that sort of equipment and know what to avoid, the local critters and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'd imagine a hammock would be a much better idea in those conditions than an airman.
Well, it's risky. Every night I dug a shell scrape. A shell scrape is basically starting a grave. It's your length, it's maybe a foot deep, it's maybe a couple of feet wide, and if you did it in the right place, there might be a tree at each end and you could string your hammock at ground level, and when you hopped in it you were off the ground but just below ground level, because the enemy had a nasty habit of firing 2 or 3 rounds of mortar fire into your position at night. Just 2 or 3 rounds, bang, 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 and where they landed, if you're just below the ground, it's going to miss you. Part of our tactics, we would, by day, we'd walk past where we were going to hoochie that night. Patrolling an area, keeping an area clear, and the word would come down the line, that's where we're going to hoochie up tonight. So, okay. Then we'd go to another place and we'd hoochie up, stop, clean weapons, have a meal, late in the afternoon, about an hour and a half before last light. Go through all the appearances of staying there the night. After dark, we would move back to this other position and stay there the night. On a couple of occasions, that position that we'd stop by daylight would take a couple of 60mm mortar rounds. And just to really deceive them, we would come out before first light and go into that position so that they didn't know we were swapping positions. Simple enough tactics, and maybe you'd only moved 100 metres, but it was enough to keep that sort of problem away. and if they came trying to probe your position, which was one of their tactics, they'd come and start throwing rocks and things and making a noise trying to get you to fire. And at night it's very difficult to hit someone, you can't see them. And just to try and find out where your weapons are. They were very brave and very ingenious at doing that sort of thing.
What were your instructions?
Not to fire. Unless you had them right on the end of the right, sort of you and me, bang bang. If you knew there was somebody really close out the front, you threw a grenade. Our American allies, unfortunately, some of them would be wandering along with the thing over the shoulder, smoking cigarettes. I've even seen them come out of the scrub with a tranny radio, not an earplug, a tranny radio, elastic banded to the side of the helmet, playing rock and roll music. It's a recipe for disaster. It's probably, you can do that sort of stuff on the European battlefield when, you're being attacked by hordes of Soviet tanks. But going through the jungle, nah. And I think we were very lucky. Our company commander was ex-SAS, and he was a smoker, etc. But he would insist, you will not smoke in the field unless you're told you can. Nobody will wash using American soap. We even got Vietnamese soap. Toothpaste. The Viet, surprisingly, had very good oral hygiene. Every time you found a cache of their equipment, every pack had a tube of Hynos toothpaste and a brand new toothbrush in it. They were big on that. So we used to use Hynos, which is a local brand. I think it was Colgate in reality, but it was a local brand of toothpaste. We even got to the stage where in some areas we were eating local food, dried fish and that sort of stuff, because all those things can really be smelt. And 100 metres away, you can smell that someone has used aftershave or has washed with soap, and it really can give you away. And he was good on that sort of stuff. The battalion policy was that you shaved every day, but as soon as we broke away from the battalion, no shaving. We'd carry one razor per section, per 10 men, and just before we married up with the battalion again, we'd stop, do an administrative stop, and everybody would have a quick so that he wouldn't get a kicking from the battalion commander for letting his troops go scruffy. But it's great camouflage. And people are using, it doesn't matter what sort of shaving soap you use, it's got a smell, and it used to give you away.
I guess also the risk of cutting yourself in
There was that as well. Yeah. Obviously the enemy didn't have to worry too much. They just don't have the facial hair that we're, and that was the thing before. All the kids, there was a village out the back in between us and the Domnai River. And the first time we went down there, all the kids came out and they all couldn't believe there. Get away, kid. They were quite funny.
So those Vietnamese products, the soap, did you also get the soap from where?
You could buy it in town. Surprisingly, we used to get a lot of gear. Cigarettes would come in the ration packs. You'd get little 5 and 6 cigarette like sampler packets in the rations. The American rations, it was a ration pack for every meal, not a day, every meal. And you'd get 3 of these for a day's rations, and you'd throw most of it away before you put it in your pack. If you're out in the field, you'd cut the top off a tin of, you used to get these ham and lima beans. So you'd cut the top off and empty the tin out into a refuse pit, so that the enemy couldn't come and dig it up and salvage the stuff. Cigarettes you'd keep, but sometimes you could only smoke sort of 2 cigarettes a day maybe. But every 10 days we'd get these bloody cardboard boxes from the American Red Cross, and they'd have a carton of cigarettes in them. They'd have shaving cream and a sup pack for the soldiers in the field. Bloody lovely, but I mean, I can remember there with a machete chopping up cartons of cigarettes and burying them. What are you going to do with them? You couldn't smoke. just couldn't smoke that many cigarettes, and no space in your pack to put them in, so you cut them up and bury them so that the enemy couldn't get hold of them. Because every bit of turned over ground, if we found a bit of turned over ground, it had to be dug up and investigated. And it could either be a cache, a rubbish pit, a grave, or a toilet. We developed a drill with a long stick and poke it down and sniff the end of the stick, and you could figure out, it's a dunny, or he thinks there might be a body at least under there. And if it was bodies, you had to dig them up, try and figure out how many bodies there were if they were in bits, and try and identify if there was any uniform with them, what units they were from, or what the insignia looked like if they had any insignia on them. Big deal, body counting. The Americans always wanted those statistics. It was a measure of how they were winning the war. So that was a bit of an unsavoury job. Sometimes you'd find butte stuff, like, they're packs full of bits and pieces, and you might find weapons and all that sort of stuff. On one operation, we actually, in the Coochie tunnels, we found a 50-bed hospital, 8 tonnes of ammunition, 2 truckloads of weapons, sort of a battalion's worth of documentation, their orderly room. At one stage I was carrying around with me a French typewriter, a big 12x6 communist flag, and a bundle of fountain pens made in Hanoi. I was going to use as trading goods, Whenever you found stuff like that, you traded it off to the Americans for something. But
So let's hear the story about the Coochie tunnels. How did you come across them? What was the circumstances?
I believe the official story is that our engineers found it, when in fact a guy by the name of Ron Sloan, who was one of our forward scouts, we were hooching up for the night, and we're into. You'd get in the jungle, you'd get these like islands of open space, a clearing, and we had to hooch you up, and we'd hooch you up just inside the jungle around the edge of this thing. And it was beaut, because if we needed it, you could get a helicopter in to, do whatever we did with helicopters. Anyway, the platoon commander was going round saying, okay, you hooch up there, that's your arc of fire, make sure all the arcs of fire were interlocking so there was no opening where, the enemy could come through, and that's part of the job. And poor old Pissy, he liked to drink, so his nickname was Pissy. The platoon commander had put him down basically right on top of what appeared to be an ant's nest. Anyway, Ronnie said, bugger this, I'll have these, and these big bloody termite ants would come out and they'd half eat the butt off your rifle. These things are real voracious eaters. And he thought, bugger this. So he started kicking the dirt into a hole in the side, and out poked this muzzle of an M1 carbine, bang, 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 shooting at his feet. It was a bunker. It was a camouflage bunker. The Viet's engineering and camouflage couldn't be beaten. It was superb. Anyway, Ronnie jumped up on top of the bloody thing. He reckoned the best way to get away from the shooting was to leap up on top of it. And then he sort of stuck there. Help, get me out of here. Anyway, got the machine gun over to one side, and the gunner said, you run off that way, and as soon as you step off, I'll start shooting. So it'll, give you some cover. So we did that. Then I got a short-range anti-armour weapon, the little tube thing you pull out the back and it's got a rocket inside. I aimed it at the thing and bang, and lifted the lid off, and it was concrete, the concrete lid on the thing. And there's this hole. And the enemy bloke, he shot through, he obviously saw me aiming up with this thing and yelling out, get your heads down. There's a great sheet of flame and backblast out the back of this thing, bazooka type thing. So we got the top off it, and somebody raced over and threw a grenade down it, and the grenade was a dud, didn't go off. So we thought, and it's getting just before dark. So we ended up doing a sentry with a machine gun poked down this hole all night, and somebody on the gun ready to, as soon as heard something down, it was to let drive with a sort of 50 round burst. The next day we started having a look down this tunnel, and there's this grenade that hadn't gone off lying down there. A couple of us had a go and sort of got about 5 or 6 metres down the tunnel and came back out and said, no, 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 no. Anyway, we were there for about 4 or 5 days. The Americans brought in engineers. Our engineers came in and they found thousands of metres of tunnel. And all these caches, hospital, fully equipped underneath. The engineering, these cunning people. Most tunnels you need to have timber for shoring, otherwise they collapse. The earth there was like a sandy clay sort of soil. In the dry season it was used to set like concrete on the surface, but down below it was fairly moist. These buggers would dig the tunnel or part of the tunnel, then they'd pour in a mix of petrol and dieseline and set fire to it. It would burn and bake the inside of the tunnel. So, you don't need shoring, All you had to worry about was get rid of the dirt, and they'd carry it down to a river or something and throw it in the river and get washed downstream. Don't have to worry about hiding the dirt. And really rat cunning with that sort of thing. You had to be careful when you found, and some of the trapdoors, we probed around there and you'd find a concrete trapdoor that when it was wet they'd sort of stuck leaves to it. And you just could not see it, and you'd be probing around with a bayonet, and all of a sudden clunk, and you'd think, I wonder if this goes bang, and you'd probe around and say, oh no, it's a trapdoor, but lift it up and see if there's any wires or strings or anything attached underneath, booby traps. But their booby trap, quite often, the thing would go straight down, and then there'd be a vertical tunnel go off from it, down, 5 or 6 feet down. Down in the bottom, often there was a sump, and that would accommodate when it was raining heavily instead of the water going into the tunnel. But these buggers would put things like scorpions in the sump, and a big tropical scorpion, folded out that long, big, either black or dark emerald green colour, and they look particularly nasty. And I've never heard of anybody being stung by one, but just the look of them used to scare you. So we used to carry a grappling hook type thing and a piece of rope. And whenever you found one of these things, you'd drop that down, and because there'd be a little wooden framework thing with dirt over the top of it, and this thing, the big tail had come up. So you had to be careful of all of that sort of thing. But the Viets, their ingenuity really was quite cunning. One thing that we found that really stunned me, when helicopters, particularly when there's a massive helicopters, you can hear them, but it's very difficult to figure out which direction they're coming from. In this area we found this, what appeared to be an ant's nest. It had holes, north, south, east and west, 4 holes in them. We found a little crawled tunnel entrance that went in underneath, and they have an air sentry sitting inside this thing. It wasn't an ant's nest, man-made. They'd hear helicopters, and he'd put his ear to each of the 4 holes, and he'd be able to pick up which one was the loudest. So if it was the west one, they're coming from the west. So they'd all nick off to the east or whatever. And I thought, talk about low-tech ingenuity, to be able to, somebody to think that through, to be able to build that. And we discovered those sort of things all the time. Simple things like if we were probing for mines, you'd use a bayonet, and you'd find a mine, scrape the dirt away, make sure it didn't have a pressure release thing underneath, and you'd get it out or blow it in situ, put an explosive charge on it and blow it. So Mr. Charles started putting metal mosquito netting with a piece of plastic in between, and connected up to a battery. So when the bayonet went through it, it would create an electrical circuit, and there'd be a booby trap somewhere that'd go off. So our bloke started using non-conductive plastic probes. And Mr. Charles rigged it all up with plastic bag with some water in it, so when the probe went through it, the water would leak between and create rat cunning with junk, with bits that they could pick up. They used to get their explosives from unexploded 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs. They'd find them, dig them out of the ground, and they'd get there with a cold chisel and cut them open and heat up the explosives, and it goes liquid, and pour it out into, and then take it away and reuse it on whatever they wanted to. Can you imagine?
Oh, look, you're painting a very vivid picture here. Yes,
Oh, well.
yes, I can. It's extraordinary. So, it was Ron, wasn't it, who got fired at the Coochie, at the opening of the Coochie, Ronnie. Yeah. Was that the first time that anyone had come across the tunnels?
We'd found a variety of tunnels. I mean, every village had bunkers underneath the houses, and a lot of people thought that's where the enemy hide in there. They weren't. They were bloody air raid shelters. People, because the Americans were a bit indiscriminate in who they dropped bombs on. If War Zone D, for example, was a free fire zone. You could shoot at anything. And I think they've probably, fairly primitive agrarian population. I think they were sellers. They'd store extra rice and keep their rice wine cool and all that. But of course, everybody, they've got to be VC, they've got these bunkers and stuff under their houses. A bit of rubbish, really. But the Coochie tunnels, they'd been there for a long time. There's a number of books on the subject. They reckon they came right from Cambodia. Some of them, the whole systems were as long as 150 kilometres, coming almost all the way down to Saigon. That had been dug while the French were there, while the Japanese were there, after the French came back. And there were if you think about it, it was probably the only thing that they could do to get themselves some sort of respite from all these aircraft flying around. For the whole duration of the tour there, you could hear an aircraft 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was always a patrolling aircraft flying around. Now, little Mickey Mouse airlines, but they were flying around. They'd pick up some sort of movement, and they knew where troops should be or shouldn't be, and they'd call in air attack or they'd call in artillery. And it was very much like the soldiers back in the fort, and they sort of go out and hunt the Indians. It was that sort of thing. So Mr. Charles had to do something. Because there was large bodies of troops, so they dug them underground, and I reckon it was a logical solution. So they could hide by day, come out at night, do what they wanted to do, and go back to the tunnels by day. And as I was saying, their engineering and their camouflage was outstanding.
So, would you have been aware that there were a tunnel system somewhere?
We were told before actually going there that that was one of their practices. So, unless you were physically going along and probing the ground all the time, you just wouldn't know where tunnels were and where they weren't. The entrances were so hard to find. Although I haven't seen it, told us some entrances you had to jump into a creek, hold your breath, and underwater entrance into the thing. Who cares about getting wet when somebody's dropping napalm on you? All of those sort of things. And, if you really were trying to find them, you'd almost have to get everybody shoulder to shoulder and sort of prod your way from the southern tip of the country all the way through. And even then, you'd probably not find them all. And I'm sure there's still hundreds of tunnels there. And one of the American ways of countering those tunnels was to do arc-light bombing raids where they'd get 9 or 11 aircraft, each carrying 32 tonnes of bombs, big 500-pounder and 1,000-pounder bombs, and in that softish earth, the bombs would bury themselves, 20 metres underground, explode and just cave in everything. And they'd do a map square, 1,000 metres by 1,000 metres. It's like the central business district of Melbourne, having 300 tonnes of bombs dumped on it. I suppose it's a bit heavy-handed, but if there were any tunnels in there, I don't think they'd survive that. And I'm sure there was a lot of them caved in with that sort of bombing, that sort of action. On the ground, the Americans had a fabulous method. They used to get a guy come in, engineer bloke, with this little compressor on a backpack, and they'd bring in bottles of acetylene, and they'd fill the tunnel. They'd find a junction in the tunnel, because there's always like a road system. They'd find a crossroad, if you will, and they'd dig a hole down and they'd pump acetylene into this thing and then let off an explosive charge and collapse all the tunnels that the acetylene had got to. That was reasonably effective. And any poor bugger that was in there, they sort of went with it too, I suppose. But we had a number of people killed in the tunnels. We had one guy, he was only in up to his shoulders, and he got stuck, and he had a breathing outfit, and he crimped the pipe, couldn't get him out. And he kicked him, he tap danced to death, trying to get out of this hole. And that was the day after we found the tunnels.
Okay, so just going back to that, you found the entrance to this tunnel. You've had someone shooting at you from the tunnel.
Yep.
So what happened after that? Did those people obviously must have vacated the tunnels?
Yeah, we never found anyone in there. We found all this equipment, we found this hospital, we found all this documentation and ammunition, but we didn't find any people. They nicked off. Gone.
So can you give me another one of your great vivid descriptions of what it was like going down into those tunnels? And
I'm a little bit claustrophobic. I'd never survive in a submarine. You'd sort of go down a vertical shaft, and it would be maybe just over head height. Then you had to sort of wiggle yourself down. It was really designed for little people. And then you're on your hands and knees. You can only go through these things on your hands and knees. And once your body's in the entranceway, it's pitch black. And if there's somebody with a gun down there, you might have a torch in one hand and a pistol in the other hand. And, at one stage I thought, well, if I'm shining this torch, I'm giving them a pretty good aiming mark. You didn't know what was in the tunnel. It could be snakes. There'd be all sorts of insects in there. There could be something really venomous that could do you in. And at one stage I thought, and if I fire this bloody pistol in here, I'll be deaf for the rest of my life, the noise in this thing. And I suppose I crawled a couple of body lengths and then thought, this really isn't the job I was trained for. So I backed out, and a couple of guys tried it, and nah.
So this was when your section first came across
that was the next morning after we'd sat all night with this machine gun poking down this hole.
And you just decided that it was
that's
too
when the
difficult.
engineers came along, and they had tunnel rats who would go down to them, and these blokes were crazy. You'd have to be crazy to go down to these things. There's nowhere to go. Somebody starts shooting at you, or there's an explosive device, or there's a snake. What do you do? Anyway,
did they appear to be crazy, these men, or is that just...
if somebody who's really twitchy, you think, this bloke's either consuming something that's not good for him, or he's got a job that's got him buttoned up too tight. Anyway,
were they Americans or Australians?
Both, and engineers. Anyway, sometimes they deem a tunnel to be just too dangerous for them, and they wouldn't go down them. But there's stories that the Americans would have, sort of crawling gun battles down along these tunnels. And I mean, my psyche, as I said, I'm a bit claustrophobic, and I would be going crazy in there. There's no way known. But they used to, by stamping on the ground and pushing rods down, and they had mine detectors. They'd be able to sometimes track down and find tunnel, these joints in the tunnel, or if they couldn't, they'd just pack as much explosives as they could get down into the entrance, just blow it and see what happened. Or coloured smoke grenade, throw it down there, close that entrance off and watch for where all the smoke comes up, because there had to be breather holes in the thing, and see where the smoke comes up and see what sort of pattern. And it's a long and tedious job, and you're never quite sure, have I got them all or have I not? And that particular tunnel there, we were there for 4 or 5 days, and we never found the end of it. We just withdrew. I mean, you can go to Vietnam now and get the guided tour down those same tunnels, and I believe they've enlarged them by 4 times to accommodate the western body. And also, obviously, you can walk through them now rather than crawl on your hands or on your belly using your elbows.
So you said there were records, Vietnamese military records, and
the Viets are great writers. Basically, every time we found a cache of packs, there might be a group who's come down from the north, they would hide their packs in a tunnel or something, and they'd go into town. The Vietnamese put on a set of civvies. They'd all carry a set of civvies. Off they'd go into town. If you found a cache of these packs, or down in the tunnels you'd find a cache of packs, or in the case of those tunnels, we found an orderly room, an office. And they were great record keepers. They'd keep diaries, which is really quite forbidden in military circles. They'd keep letters from their girlfriends and mums and all that sort of stuff, just like our guys, because a lot of them had come from other parts of the country or come from the north. And the orderly room bit that we found, it basically had the service records of all the people in this particular unit. And the unit wasn't home, it was away somewhere. And the intelligence people came in, and they apparently got quite a bit of advantage out of all that. I mean, they had photographs. It's a bit hard to get away with it. So every suspect who was pulled in, and every suspect was a young man or a young woman, they'd check through the photos, and that got them a long way to rounding up a lot of the opposing forces in that area. And that was Cu Chi's north of Bien Hoa, north of Saigon, up towards the Parrot Beak, Cambodian border, near Bien Hoa, I think. And that area was it was a reasonable commercial area. I mean, if there was no shots being fired, it would probably be a fairly wealthy area. Probably is now.
So you were there for 4 or 5 days. Was there any retaliation while you were there?
As I recall, there might have been the odd little probe at night, but nothing serious. Obviously, the unit that had occupied this thing was away doing something else, or our force was too big. And I mean, we ended up with the entire brigade and more there. This thing was so big, they were finding tunnel entrances and popping smoke grenades, and my God, where does this bloody thing go? And it was going on and on and on. And I read a book a couple of years ago, and it described just how far this thing went, and we hardly touched it. Maybe they just withdrew further down the tunnels, who knows? But when you think about it, the determination to be able to do what they wanted to do without being interfered with, and can you imagine the work that must have gone into that sort of stuff? And the time that it would have taken, really quite huge. And they were like that, the Viets. But they couldn't navigate.
How do you mean?
They used to use local guides. Troops coming down from the north, or troops moving around in areas they didn't know, they used to have local guides show them where to go. They just the concept of navigation and grid references and all that sort of was apparently a bit beyond them. And we used to have a lot of success doing what we call track squats. We'd set up a little triangle, one leg of the triangle next to a track, machine gun on each end, and occasionally a couple of people would walk down it, bang, bang. And it was successful. You know, almost an ambush, but not a set ambush as such. You'd stop for an admin stop. You'd be quiet, you'd have sentries out, and occasionally people would come down the track because they... And surprisingly, we found out that the Vietnamese, as we know it, is not a native of Vietnam. The natives are like Aboriginals, the Montagnards and that, who live up in the mountains. What we know as Vietnamese came down from southern China, you know, centuries ago. And these people, their mythology says that the Moi, the monsters, live in the forest, and they're a bit superstitious. They didn't like it, going off the tracks into the forest all that much, which used to make me wonder about their discipline to get their troops to do those sort and move at night. But they did move on tracks quite often. Rarely would they go through the jungle unless they had done a reconnaissance by day, marked out a track, and you know, so that they could move through it at night, move their troops through at night. If we found that, we could ambush it.
So, for example, these little triangular setups you do beside the tracks, and you get a couple of people. Was it they were Viet Cong that you were getting, that you were hitting, or were they civilians? Or
sometimes they were dressed as civilians, but they were armed. You know, that was the nature of the war, where, crikey, while we were going there, we were told, you know, these people wear black pyjamas. When we got there, we thought, Christ, the place is alive with them. Everybody wears black pyjamas. That's the national dress, you know. And the NVA would wear like a really yucky looking green uniform, and those old British Army pith helmets, they'd wear those. And you'd certainly be able to know those guys. But if we were squatting on a track, we would report back and we would say, we're doing a track squat at grid diddly diddly diddly. Is there any known friendly movement down this track? Because it might be local Indigenous forces on our side who might be used, and obviously you don't want to shoot up people on your side. And if you got, you know, a report back saying no, there is no friendly movement on that track, somebody came down the track, they're armed, sorry about that. And to the best of my knowledge, there was not any mistakes. I mean, those sort of things do happen on occasion, but not under those circumstances. I mean, you'd check. The Australian Army has got what they call the rules of engagement. If in doubt, don't shoot. So you've got to be absolutely sure what you're shooting at is opposing forces. And that way it keeps you out of trouble. You don't go shooting up some farmer going out to you know, work his buffalo in the paddies, or mum and a couple of kids going down to get water from the well or something like that. You've got to be able to see your target. You've got to be able to identify your target before you engage it. Because if you don't do that, well, these days certainly you can get into serious trouble. It's a war crime, you know. And even though that sort of stuff wasn't being practiced then, I would imagine you'd still be in a hell of a lot of trouble if you fired indiscriminately. So you had to be sure.
Just going back to earlier on, you were talking about patrols. You're talking about, you know, digging the hoochie at night, and this, you know, sort of fire that you get around about sunset or at night time, and how you change your location to fool the enemy.
Move around, yeah.
I was just curious about if you were out on patrol at night, did you come across encampments? Did that happen very often, that you would come across a camp of the enemies, and
Not
what
really.
would your strategy be?
They tended to sleep by day and move by night. There's been occasions when I've been out in a standing patrol when, you can hear them going past. There was one case in Charlie Company 1RR where there was a standing patrol on a track, and it was so close to things that you had a radio, but you never spoke into it. The mush that comes over a radio, you press a switch, you could press once, it's okay, press twice, we're in trouble, press 3 times, fire the mission, fire the artillery mission. That was, and then maybe while you're running away, you're on the radio, there's thousands of the Mongols, But this particular patrol, they were a standing patrol, 4 or 5 blokes. They were on next to this track, and they stopped counting at about 400. And these guys were moving through with torches, and they were talking and all this sort of stuff. And the section commander withdrew so he could get on the radio, and they fired artillery missions on them. But he got into trouble. His company commander said, "You should have opened fire." He said, "For Christ's sake, sir, there's only 5 of us. We stopped counting at 400. A big NVA unit moving." Where we were up in the north of Saigon was one of the exits from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they would come down into that area. And that was part of the problem. You never knew when when the forward scout first fired his first shot, contact front, the thought would go through your mind: is it 2 blokes in a muzzle-loading bloody musket, or is it a completely equipped regular North Vietnamese regiment? Because you never knew until you started getting into it a little bit, and sometimes we had to pull back. You just couldn't take on the size of the force. So you'd work your way back and call it artillery and mortars and try and disengage, get a clean break.
And you did that? You were in situations like that?
Yeah. I didn't have to do that personally, but I was with a platoon, and we had to pull back. It was just the force was too big. You don't attack battalions with platoons, or if you do, you're dead, or stupid, or both. You're supposed to take on a group with sort of odds of at least 3 to 1. It's not Marksbury the Queen's Marks. It's not professional boxing, gentleman's boxing. It's you're there to kill the bastards. And if you don't take on a larger force, because you'll get done, you'll get badly mauled. So discretion is the better part of valour. Pull back, get out of there, call for bigger forces. That was the beauty of being there. It was all in a fairly small place, and you could get fire support. We used to actually get fire support from ships at sea. The Americans used to have a couple of battleships chugging up and down the coast, and they couldn't cover the entire country, but if you could get naval gunfire, it was spot on accurate. It was so accurate, 16-inch guns. They were bloody big guns.
How far would they fire?
30 or 40 miles. These are whacking great big guns. They can't put guns that big on land because it would rip the carriage or the truck or whatever it was on to bits. But at sea, the ship moves when they fire them. The recoil is so savage, and they were really very good.
But how accurate?
Spot on. They were the most accurate fire, apart from an aircraft being able to physically see the target on the ground. If you gave a grid reference, an 8-figure grid reference down to a 10-metre square, they would put their fire into that 10-metre square. No problems. Every time. And this is in the days of no satellite navigation, but the system of we had one here in Victoria, down in Gippsland. They had the big tower. I forget the name of the system, but it was before satellites. The last step before they went to satellites. And they used to use that system to make sure that, you know, once you know where your ship is, then you can shoot the gun to where you want to put the artillery shell. And that was good. Helicopters were probably the shot, because they never had to overfly targets. That's the beauty of a helicopter. It can stand back and shoot at a target. A fixed wing plane's got to overfly the target, and while it's overflying it can get shot at. And simple things like you've got to make sure the aircraft attack across your front. You never have them coming from behind or from advance on you, because you know their guns are electrically fired, the bombs are electrically released, and sometimes there's a glitch and the bomb drops too late or too soon, and you could wear it, so you have them coming across, and that way, if it turns to worms, it's not going to collect you. And only on one occasion we had a Sky Raider attack a position, a big single engine propeller, World War II, and they're quite large airplanes. They carry 14 tonnes of bomb load. They've got 4 or 6 20mm cannon and a couple.
I was wondering if we could talk about the various sorts of patrols that you'd have undertaken. I mean, we've talked to some guys, you know, they talked about the ambush patrol and the observational type, search and destroy, all that sort of thing. If you could break those down for us and sort of describe what you get up to.
Well, the official terms for patrols are fairly limited. There's a fighting patrol, which you go out and you're spoiling for a fight. You're looking for someone to have a shot at. We never really did any of that. That was a Korea thing where there was fixed lines and you'd go over and get close to them and shoot them up. We did a lot of ambushing, favourite tactic, ours and theirs. And we did a lot of search and destroy, where and the patrols could go from basically platoon up to brigade size, where you just sweep through an area and you might cordon it off or you might not, just looking for the enemy. You know, you might have had intelligence reports that say there are enemy forces in that area, estimated at 1,000 people. So we'd sort of muster together 3,000 people and go looking for them. Sometimes that was successful, sometimes it wasn't, or in varying degrees. The only other sort of patrolling that you would do, and that was the mundane, boring stuff, is what we used to call standing patrols. And in reality, early warning, where you'd go and you'd sit at a location and your sole job was to observe a particular approach to your main unit, wherever that was. That could be by night, could be by day, depending on the situation. But everybody talks about, go out on patrol. You didn't do all that much of that. You went out on an operation where the entire unit went out on an operation, and the bulk of them in Vietnam was search and destroy. You basically swan around the countryside looking for the enemy on reasonable information that there was an enemy force in a particular area. And once you found him, you would bring as quickly as possible whatever weapons and equipment that you had to either destroy him or capture him as quickly as possible, bring that to bear, and you win the battle. Theoretically, you win the war. Doesn't quite work that way sometimes, but there you go.
Is it possible for you to sort of walk us through one of those encounters? I mean, you said a successful one, for example, one where you've gotten, there's contact and you walk away having won the battle. If you can walk us through.
Okay. Basically, this might go on for days, where you're moving through the scrub and you would try to avoid moving in single file, because obviously you're not covering very much ground in single file, but control is a bit difficult having people in extended file. We often used to use an arrowhead formation, which was a bit easier to control, and depending on the thickness of the scrub you could get through, and you had good deployment of fire to the front and to either flank. So it's a good formation to use. Sometimes you might be walking for days. You're observing silence, you're not cooking, you're not smoking, all of those things. And you're really getting quite on edge because you don't know whether it's round behind the next tree or it's never or it's next week or whatever. So people are a bit keyed up. In fact, one of the funny things I observed, as soon as we used to get into contact, everybody would start whistling and singing and yelling out to each other as that release of having been for days without talking, without making any sort of noise. But the usual thing was there'd be a bang, 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 and usually we would be walking into them. I suppose only slightly more to our favour that we would initiate the contact than them initiating the contact. Our guy would see them first and shoot first. What would usually happen in that case, depending again on the country, the Australian Army drill is that in that sort of contact, that's the first section that contacts, the machine gun will whiz round to the left flank, the idea to fire across the front. That's the best employment of machine gun fire, and then the troops would line up and you can sweep forward and overrun them and all that. That's beautiful if you're dealing with a couple of blokes. We even devised in thicker jungle, when we had to really walk in single file, we even devised a separate tactic. The forward scout would bang, bang, bang. Everybody would go to ground, everyone except the machine gunner, who'd have a 50 round belt on the gun, and he'd just go and shoot a big arc. You might not hit anything, but it'd chop the scrub down a bit so you could see a bit, and it would make the opposition get their heads down. When that was done, he'd go to ground and reload the weapon. The section commander would take over and you'd go from there. But you always had some sort of a drill worked out for that initial contact. The aim of the drill is that you take back the initiative, particularly if they've shot first. The American tactic when we first arrived there was as soon as they contacted an enemy and started shooting, because of their terrific firepower they've got behind it, they would pull back 100 metres so that they could employ their artillery and all that sort of stuff. The enemy very quickly realised this and would move forward with them. If you're up close, you can't use those weapons, so it was down to pistols and rifles and machine guns. And initially, when we were having contacts, we were getting quite a few kills because they were moving forward on us until they realised the blokes in the bush hats aren't Americans. So we went back to the tactic of the contact drill. It's a very basic thing. In fact, Australian troops learned it off the Japanese in New Guinea during the Second World War. It was a Japanese tactic. It works. So we would use that sort of thing, but once, and that would only take 20 or 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Once the drill's done, it's done. Then the commander has to take over. He has to find out what it is, what, where, how many. He's got to get information back from the scout. And in that particular style of warfare, you never knew whether it was two blokes with a muzzle-loading musket or a well-trained, well-equipped, regular North Vietnamese regiment. So it was important that there was some very quick finding out just who the enemy was. And then, obviously, if it was bigger than a section, half a dozen people, the forward section commander would have to be talking back to the platoon commander, who'd have to be talking back to the company commander, because you might, just too big for the first group. If the first group said, it's only two blokes, I can handle this, then they would follow through, and they might, quite often, in the jungle, if you're contacted like that, quite often if you realise, if you know that you're two people and you've run into a group and you can see movement, you think, you'll turn around and run like crazy and just get the hell out of there. What else can you do? So sometimes there'd be a bit of a chase. people running through the scrub trying to catch these people. That could be dangerous because they might run back into the regiment's position and you're running straight into it. So there was it's a risky deal. I mean, you know, it's soldiering. But as a general thing, if it settled down to a shootout, if the enemy stayed and started trading shots with you, you could safely assume it's a reasonable sized force and they're pretty confident that they can have a go at us. So at that stage, you know, and we were lucky, we all had radio, every section had a radio. The usual Australian Army establishment in those days used to be just one radio with each platoon. But we'd got to the stage where we had 4 radios in each platoon, one with each section and one with platoon headquarters. So the section commanders, instead of having to yell through the noise of small arms fire or crawl back and tell the platoon commander and the platoon commander, the company commander, just get on the radio, and you know, it's section plus there's a machine gun, and that used to be difficult too. I mean, one assumes, it's the old Japanese tactic, everybody in the group had either single shot bolt action rifles or semi-automatic rifles and one machine gun, so you could figure out fairly quickly from the fire, it's a section, it's a platoon, it's 2 blokes, whatever. In late January, early February 66, we captured the first AK-47 and everything changed. Within a fortnight, all opposing forces were carrying AK-47s. So it was very hard to, you know, before that it was SKSs. They used to like American M1 and M2 carbines, little pygmy rifles, because they suited the Vietnamese stature. The big American Garands were just too big for them, used to knock them over. But the little carbines, which couldn't really, they could, but it was hard to kill a man with one. They were really two-handed pistols. You know, that sort of weaponry, captured stuff, and semi-automatic SKS, Russian and Chinese stuff. But then when these AK-47s appeared, and I don't know if you know, an AK-40, it's got a change lever on the side, and you thumb it from safe down to the first click, it goes straight to bursts, which is a great idea, because when do you need bursts? In a hurry. They push it a bit further to get single shots. Anyway, they, you know, all of a sudden there'd be a hail of fire. One of the advantages was because the Viets were relatively small in stature and light in weight, if the first couple of rounds missed you, the rest were going to go way over your head, because they drive taxis, just finger on the trigger, brrr, but quite scary and quite deafening. And you know, what have we struck here? You know, they used to drag around in the scrub with them anti-aircraft guns, big heavy calibre machine guns on like a wheelbarrow, and they'd wheel these things around, and if the aircraft started bothering, they'd start shooting at the anti-aircraft guns. And you know, it could be they started bringing those in, the 50 calibre machine gun, and they chop trees down, big trees with those things. They start shooting around you with those. So it was difficult to figure what it was on the other side of the shooting. As a general thing, you'd settle down to trading shots, and usually at that stage, if it was that sort of size, and you know, there was a platoon facing it, the company commander would then start swinging platoons round to one or the other flank to try and outflank this group, or they'd call in air support, or call in artillery, mortars, and get them down to a danger close. You can bring those into about 10 metres, and start using those weapons to see if you can break them up and see if you can push forward and find. And you know, obviously, if it's a bigger force than you think, then you've got problems. Happened at Long Tang, where a company basically opposed, I think it was 2.5 regiments. And they ended up being attacked on 3 sides, and it rained. The position on the map was probably in the corner of 4 maps. and it was probably uphill. I don't know, I wasn't there. You know, that's where usually the worst battles are, in the corner of 4 maps, uphill and in the bloody rain. And they ran out of ammo and all that. You know, a rifle company, if they start panic firing, have got about 3 minutes worth of firepower. Then, with the proper issue of ammunition, then they start running out of ammo. One of our big fears was running out of ammunition, so people used to carry as much ammo as they could. You'd throw away rations and go hungry to carry more ammunition. But as a general thing, that's usually what happened with those. It had settled down to trading shots, artillery, mortars, maybe tactical air support to break them up, and if you were down the back end of this thing, it might be over the other side of a ridge line, you'd almost sit down and basically have a cigarette and watch your arc and wait until something happened. So there could be a lot of waiting and doing nothing except observing, keeping your wits about yourself, because if we can go around a flank, he can go around a flank too. And just in case somebody did come round.
Now you were commanding a section.
Yeah, I ended up commanding a section as a lance corporal, a section of about 5 blokes, 6 blokes there, including me.
So how was that? Were there ever any disagreements in the field in those situations? Was it always a matter of
Oh yeah.
How would that
and
be?
Troops would argue with you, and you'd almost have to present your case sometimes. It depended on how dicey the situation was. I mean, blokes didn't want to get killed, and I certainly didn't want to get killed either. If you couldn't get forward, if you couldn't crawl forward, if the fire was that heavy, then basically you stayed where you were, conserved your ammunition, fired at muzzle flashes, and if you saw movement there, you fired at that. And you knew somebody behind you was doing something, either a flanking manoeuvre or calling in artillery or air support. But some guys would go to ground basically and not return fire, and you had to, get off your arse and move forward and find out what's going on. Or you watch your arc and get your rifle from underneath you and get it out in front of you and start looking at your arc of responsibility, and if any enemy troops appear, you fire at them. Yeah, okay.
And if they didn't, I mean, if you had to get really insistent,
you could put a couple of rounds over their head. That's happened on occasion. Otherwise people would lie there and get killed. When you can hear these things snapping over your head, and you know that they're only about 6 inches above your head, and you're sprawled flat on the ground, and you know that if you get up a little bit too high, you'll cop it. And if this bloke over there, they might roll over the top of him, but you're next. But if he slows them down, that's good for you. So you mongrel, keep looking at it. There's been, at the end of some firefights, there's been almost fist fights. Emotions can run really high. There was actually some paying off at the big reunion we had in '91. There was a couple of people paid off, whack, 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 for things deemed to have been, or actually done, or deemed to have been done 20 odd years before.
So some guys, obviously, everyone deals with that moment differently, and the fear and all that.
Yeah. And everybody's scared. Let me tell you, everybody is really scared. Nobody wants to die, particularly. You're feeling a bit grotty. You're lying on the ground. You haven't had a tub for weeks. You're really cheesed off. You're tired. The mail hasn't come. And you think, I'd really like to die a bit better than this. that's the sort of thoughts that go through your mind. Or if, if bullets are hitting things around you and digging up the dirt in front of you, that's when you start getting to, dear God, not me, not now, dear God, not me, not now, and, and I promise I'll be a good boy in the future, all stupid stuff. But you are really so excited and so hyped up, you actually carry on and perform your job. There's not many people who were so terrified that they just froze up. Some did, but it was a rare occurrence. And quite often a guy might do that after, he hasn't done that in 20 contacts before, does it in that one, and then never does it again. And who knows what goes through people's minds. Just had a bad feeling about something or whatever. The morning that I was wounded, I had this bloody terrible itchy rash on my backside, and I had a real bad feeling about the day. And I went to the company aid post and I said, look, I don't think I can go out in this operation, I've got this, yada, yada. And the company commander said, bullshit, you're going. And I got shot that day. And I had this really bad feeling about that day. Some people get premonitions.
But had you had feelings like that before? Was this like days where you thought this is not going to be good?
Oh, look, I mean, even these days, you'll get a bad feeling. You wake up in the morning, you think this would be a good day to stay in bed, and nothing works. Everything turns to worms. You have a car prang, or some idiot cuts you off, and you say you're a dickhead. Next thing, he's out of the car and he's about 15 foot tall, and you think, oh, this bloke's going to kill me. We all get those sort of things, I suppose. I mean, do you? I do, on occasion.
I think I had one this morning, actually.
Did you? I mean, maybe you, in that situation, maybe your senses are finer tuned, so that when you that, and you've seen blokes who've been badly ripped up by bullets or killed, and you think, oh, gee whiz. We had a couple of guys lost limbs, and I think I'd rather been killed than lose a limb. And so what do you do?
Did there ever come a time when you become hardened to that sort of thing, or is it always just?
No, I didn't. There was always a niggle of fear. Well, first of all, I think anybody who says that he wasn't scared is either so insensitive as to be strange, something wrong with them psychologically, or they're bullshitting you. And when the shooting started, one of the beauties of the drills is that you actually get into a position to do something without thinking about it. If you didn't have that, I reckon most people would probably drop to the ground and say, hello, what do I do now? And it really would be a disaster. But quite often you are more scared about what, if you sort of hold back and lie there, you're terrified about what your mates are going to say after the firefight when you come out of it unscathed and somebody says, where were you gutless bastard? That type of thing. That motivates people to move on. Some people think that they probably can't live with themselves if they let other people down. I don't know. I'm too much of a coward to suicide, but some of the people that I went to war with have suicided. 3 or 4 of them have suicided. I don't know. Was it something to do with that's been drilling away in the back of their mind for years? I don't know.
You mentioned how, after a contact, things had subsided. There might be a bit of a punch up.
Yeah.
Would those tensions or animosities sort of be stopped there? And then you mentioned 91.
Oh no, they'd very quickly die. People would let fly with what's in them. You stupid mongrel! If you almost got me killed. Next time you do that, I'll bloody well shoot you. and it would, you know, they might not talk to each other for a couple of days, but then under those circumstances, but you know, a couple of weeks later they'd be in a pub somewhere getting drunk together. Most times.
Do you remember your very first contact, the very first time you fired your gun in anger,
Yeah, we had 2 guys wounded. Errol Weatherall was the very first contact that we had. We'd been bashing through the scrub, had people getting a bit cheesed off. We'd been there a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and Errol Weatherall, who was the tail end Charlie, turned around. There's these people following us. So old Errol brought his trusty SLR up to his shoulder, bang, fired a shot and missed, and the rifle had a stoppage. Errol stood there, instead of going to ground, started carrying out the drill to clear his weapon. The opposing forces gentleman put his rifle up and didn't miss, and got Errol right in the face and ripped the side of his face out. So Errol's on the ground screaming blue murder. Dave Mundy, one of the other Lance Corporals, he should have been down the tail end, that's right, because he had an Owen gun, but he'd been talking to somebody a bit further up the line. You know, we were getting a bit lax with no contact. He raced back and he's sort of firing 25 round bursts from his Owen gun. We used to only put 25 rounds in because anymore it used to bugger the spring. You could put 30 in, but we'd only put 25 in so they wouldn't jam. And he's firing 25 round bursts, yeah. He got hit right there and it amputated his leg. Ripped it right off. It was hanging by a bit of skin at the back. Went down. He continued shooting. He got shot through the right shoulder and his arm was broken. So he picked it up with his left hand, continued shooting. In the meantime, the rest of us are coming back around. I'm up with the forward section. We come back around and we're firing into these. I think there was 5 of them originally and one of them got away and we got 4 of them. And we came and started shooting in there, and it was really exciting. Oh, beauty, the enemy! Yeah. Until we sort of got back and saw Errol and Dave, and then everybody, you know, blokes were wandering off into the scrub and having a big spew, and it's very, you know, you never anticipate your blokes are going to get hit. It's just something, you know it, but you don't expect it. You know it could happen, but you're hoping against hope that it won't. And then, of course, when we actually got the bodies, as these dead guys that we'd killed, were very quiet, sheepish little soldiers. And we buried these people. We got the dust-off helicopter, came and took Dave and Errol away. We buried these people and we went into a harbour right close to it for the night. And I don't know that anybody slept that night. And we buried them fairly shallowly, and the next morning the pigs or something that must have been around, the bodies were half uncovered, and that sort of took away the Cowboys and Indians feeling about it all.
I guess you're feeling some pretty new and incredible emotions there. Are you able to share? I mean, is that something you talk about, or is it just you just get on with the job?
Actually, in those days, you didn't talk about it. You might talk about, oh, did you see the way that bloke took those bloody 15 hits in the chest, you know? Ugh. Or, shit, did you see Dave's leg? Oh, Christ, I hope that doesn't happen to me. But apart from that, no. You wouldn't get there and say, you know, this is how I feel about it, you know, and start looking a bit sideways at you. This is back in the days when, you know, men were men and women were glad of it. So they say.
What about, you've talked about the search and destroy patrols. Ambush patrols, that must have been a fairly important aspect of what you do.
Yeah, whenever we had enough information to say that there was... ambushes are linear things as a general thing, so it's a track. So if we had pretty solid information that this track was being used, we'd set up an ambush. An ambush is a very intricate operation and requires a lot of planning and preparation. And it's not just a line lying down. You've got to have depth to it. You've got to have people behind you. You've got to put sentries out. You've got to do this by daylight. It's difficult, almost impossible to do it by night. So you've got to set it up in daylight. And you've got to do it in such a way so that people can't see you. And it's a really dodgy sort of a thing to do. And on the intelligence information you've got to figure out what sort of group will I contact in this ambush. If it's going to be a regiment, it's bloody stupid setting up a platoon ambush, because you could get into all, anti-ambush drills. Our anti-ambush drill is to turn into the fire and straight into the fire, shooting back. It gets you out of the killing ground in the shortest possible time. If you survive that, you've got a pretty good chance of getting to your 60th birthday sort of thing, If you run away from the firing, you're in the killing ground, maybe hundreds of metres. If you try to move through, they're going to catch it, because there's usually a machine gun sighted at each end. Most regardless of what army, that's the way they sight. The enemy put a little dodge on that. You've seen them carrying these RPGs, the shoulder-fired rocket launchers. These days they're all RPG-7s, the later model, but in those days they were RPG-2s. Very similar, but same sort of thing. Every third or fourth bloke would have one of these bloody RPGs loaded, ready to go. And if you ambushed them, they would turn into the ambush and fire these things and hit the trees. And you've got a fairly big explosion, you've got bits of shrapnel, you've got half a tree falling down. That was part of their anti-ambush drill. And there was a couple of Australian ambushes that almost came to grief over those sort of things. Often we would prefer to do mechanical ambushes. That's with claymore mines. You understand what a claymore is? A directional mine. It's set in the ground, it's aimed, it's electrically fired, command fired, and you might set up a dozen of these mines along a track. The enemy comes along. You've got to have some sort of method of figuring out when they're in there, because you've got to be back sort of 90 feet from these mines, and you've got a little handheld electric generator, and you fire all these mines, and usually there's not much in the way of bodies left. It just minces everything up. That was a popular way of doing it. So if you hit a larger group, you'd get some of them, and if they became angry and had a go, all they'd find is all this sites of exploded mines, and you'd be back from that and you're gone out of there. So that was a popular way of doing ambushes with mechanical ambushes with claymores.
So how many ambushes would you have undertaken which were successful like that?
Oh, in the company, I suppose we would have probably done a dozen over the time. Successful, and you might only get one or two. And like I was saying before, what we used to call a track squat, which wasn't really an organised ambush, where you'd stop for an admin stop, and because you've got 3 guns in the section, you put a gun at each point, so it's almost triangular in shape. That gives it depth, and you can fire down the front of the legs, and that is the correct use of machine guns. And you'd prop with one of these legs on the side of a track somewhere, and you depending on the scrub, you're in off the track a bit. And quite often you'd get somebody walking down the track. One particular day we had a local tax collector come down the track. There were 2 guys and a woman. 2 of them were armed, and one of the men and the woman were armed with AKs. The tax collector had a big bag full of money, and they walked down the track and we fired on them. They shot back and actually hit one of the machine gunners, only slightly wounding him, but we killed all of them and got this big bag of money. and that was just from a track squad. An admin stop, 4 o'clock in the afternoon sort of thing. Usually by day, the temperature was such, the tropical humidity was such, the enemy rarely moved between sort of 11 in the morning and 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They were in their hammocks resting. We were the only silly sods walking through the jungle. Bit of a waste of time in reality. We would have been better off operations just after first light and operations just before last light. The rest of the day, sit, be quiet and wait. And there was a lot of that went on, sitting, being quiet and just waiting to see who came down a track or something of that nature.
And how difficult is it to sort of maintain your edge when you are waiting, when there's such lulls?
Oh, yeah, it can be very difficult. You tend to... You plan your next holiday in your head. You think what you're going to do when you get home. You plan, you know that you've got a day in Saigon coming up and you think, oh, and you start thinking about what you're going to do on your day off, just to keep the brain going. 'Cause, I mean, if you've been out in the scrub for a week or so, you've been getting, if you're lucky, 4 hours in 24 sleep, and that's sleeping on the ground sort of thing. It's pretty, and it's warm, pretty hard to stay awake. You can't move too much, you've got to keep quiet, you can't smoke, so it is difficult to keep concentration going. I'm told that the average human can concentrate on something for about 12 minutes. After that, it's drifting away into dream time. So you'd try and move yourself a bit, all those little tricks about lying in ambush so you don't go to sleep. Stretch one leg, then stretch the other leg. Wet your finger and across the top of your eyelids. It tends to keep your eyes open. All that sort of stuff. And yeah, it can be difficult. Probably the only thing you could really do was have a drink of water and try and keep, and maybe a bit of water in the face to keep you a bit more alert, but very difficult. And
Was there any drinking? I mean, did anyone take out harder stuff on the sly? Was there any of that sort of thing going on?
Not really. Once in the field we got a can of beer each. It had been a really nasty day. Rossi Mangana had both his legs blown off when he stood on a mine. We'd walked into a minefield. Terry Loftus had got shrapnel up through his legs. Everybody was really up, and the place was littered with these bloody booby traps. They were everywhere. Grenades with fishing line attached. You couldn't see the bloody fishing line, If you tripped one, ching, instantaneous fuse, and these Chinese bloody spud masher grenades. And we finally got out of that patch of forest into a cleared area, and the Americans actually issued us with a can of beer each, a cold can of beer, one per man. And that was the only time we ever got grog in the field. Only time. That boy who sat there, oh, thank you, God. Oh, a real rotten day.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? How did you extricate yourself from that position? It sounds like you need to move in a hurry, but at the same time you can't.
When Rossi, and his legs were literally blown off, ripped right off both his legs, blood everywhere, and the screaming. To get him out, we were in thick scrub. We had to get an armoured personnel carrier to come in, and as it came in, it was triggering booby traps and things. So basically, we sort of moved out a bit and let this thing come in and load him and Loftus onto it, and then get out. And then the rest of us try to get back, sort of, we're fire and movement, because we knew that they didn't set these things up and then just leave them without sentries or people observing. We knew that there had to be some of them around, so we're sort of trying to go back along the turned up earth that the tracked vehicle had come in and done. being fairly sure that if there was a mine in there, it would have gone off by now, to try and get back out of this thing. And it's just a matter of one man at a time, and you're watching your arcs, and then you'd move back 10 paces, and it took us an hour or 2 hours or whatever. I can't remember the time to get back out of this particular patch of scrub. That was really crappy. When we got back, immediately called in artillery or airstrikes or whatever to try and get rid of the mines or to vent the spleen or whatever. And everybody's sort of sitting around. I think just about everybody in the forward section had been splashed with Rossi's blood. He's still alive too, I might add. Saw him, in fact I'll be seeing him in June. Gets around on 2 tin legs. The mongrel owns half of Sydney. He's a multi-millionaire, I think, by now. Smart lad. Yeah, that was a really nasty day. Really nasty. 12th of October, day before my birthday it was. Remember it quite clearly. Real shit of a day. But apart from that, the rest were diamonds.
You got a beer at the end of this.
Well, yeah. You've drunk much American beer, have you? You know the comment we had before about there's no such thing as a bad beer? Well, there is.
Budweiser.
Bud wasn't bad, actually. I didn't mind Bud. But we used to get mainly Heinekens. That wasn't bad. Some of the American beer, though, Hams and Schlitz. Real bad. Or San Miguel we used to get a bit off too. That was okay. And like I say, I didn't mind Bud. But it took about 6 months before we started getting regular supplies of Australian beer. And then, if you didn't mind it, you could do sort of 2-for-1 trades with the Americans. W beers.
So the Aussie beer was popular with the Yanks?
Oh, hell yes. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Or the local brew. They had 33. That was labelled as 33. Ba Moi Ba, Vietnamese for 33. That was more like embalming fluid. And there was another beer called Beer LaRue. And nobody used to drink that because we would get medical reports saying, whatever you drink, spit out of the gutter, but don't drink Beer LaRue.
We're talking about beer. I wouldn't mind staying on that subject. Not just beer,
Sure.
but the whole sort of recreation,
yeah.
letting off steam. I mean, how would you do that?
Well, grog was, the country was awash in grog, quite literally. The only place you didn't have it was out on operations. The Americans would absolutely forbidden. It's like an American ship at sea. There's no alcohol on an American warship. That's their rules. I think that's probably a bit iffy, but none of our guys would bother with grog out in the field, and we had some chronic drunks. But as soon as we got back into the base camp area of Bien Hoa, anything went. We would get a ration of, I think it was 4 cans per day, 15 cents a can or something like that. And eventually we actually built our own pub out of packing cases. we made this, we called it the Etamoga Pub. And it was all just, we had, the hot box meal keepers. We had those with ice and use them as eskies with beer in. There was no tap beer or anything exotic like that. And somebody would be detailed to be the bartender and sell the grog. One of the most sought after tools, and you were like a god if you had one, was a church key, because this is in the day before zip top cans. And short of stabbing it with a bayonet or biting through it with your teeth, you had to have a church key to get into the beer. So most guys on their ID tags had a church key hanging. And that could be painful if you leapt to the ground and the thing dug into you. So anyway, in the base camp area, it was mainly just beer. We did have a little PX shop in the battalion area, a little tin shed where you could go and buy stuff. but it was really frowned upon to drink spirits. Wine was unheard of. If you really wanted wine, the only place you could get that, and it'd be French wine, would be in a restaurant in town. And I mean, Saigon was running just like a normal city, except that most people had green suits on and were armed. But still, the restaurants were running and movie theatres and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. The only place where you really could get into the rantan is if you had a day off in Saigon. We used to go to Saigon. I believe the troops down at Nui Dat never got into Saigon, poor buggers, because Saigon was a great place. It really was. But to get there from Bien Hoa, there's 2 convoys a day. Or 2 convoys twice a day. One leaving Saigon, 8 o'clock in the morning, one leaving Bien Hoa, 8 o'clock in the morning. The road was like the Geelong Road, divided, big divided carriageway road. And they would cross going the other way. It was so dangerous. They'd have tanks escorting them. They'd have herds of armed gunship helicopters escorting them in case somebody had a shot at them. In the afternoon at 4 o'clock would be the same, the crossing of the convoys from Bien Hoa, Saigon. And of course, coming back from Saigon would really be dangerous because all the occupants of the trucks were pissed. And they used to give them back their weapons when they got on the truck. So there's all these Australian soldiers coming back from leave and didn't really want to come back from leave, armed and full of bad manners. And that used to be quite an amazing and amusing thing to see, the convoys going into town. In the city of Saigon, or Cholon, the big sort of suburb right next to it, where it was supposed to be a very dangerous place to go, but most of us used to go to Cholon. There was at least 15 bars on every block, and you could get any amount of grog or whatever, usually local grog. The big deal the vets wanted US dollars, and we were being paid in US dollars when we first arrived there, cash, US dollars, which was highly unusual actually. And for $20 bills you could exchange it for piastre and treble, quadruple your money. And a lot of people did, of course. You could go to the PX and buy 6 cartons of cigarettes, 6 bottles of Johnny Walker, and the whole thing cost you less than $20. Go to the nearest bar, plonk these 2 big supermarket bags on the counter, walk a couple of seats down, sit down, might buy me bar, get a beer. By the time you finished the beer, the 2 parcels would be gone and be a stack of piastre that high that you couldn't jump over, 15,000 piastre, whatever, and that would be your play money for the rest of the day. So it was good fun, and a day off was such a relief in town, to get away from, and you were unarmed, in civvies, unarmed, short sleeve shirt, pair of dacks, pair of shoes, and the locals, all they were interested in was parting you from your money. And it was beautiful, you had this stack of money and your intention was not to come back with any of it. So everything was pretty sweet. The only really amusing thing about this that I know about was that if you missed the convoy that left outside the Metropole Hotel in right in the guts of Saigon to go back to Bien Hoa, and if you didn't get back, you were in real trouble. But if you could get out to Tonsanut, to the big airbase, there was the air taxi, which used to fly a 10-minute flight. It was an old gurney bird. It had no perspex in the windows. It had no doors. It had no seats. And it had straps like in a tram. And I reckon the funniest sight you could see was sort of 30 drunks in this plane that would take off with such a short flight, wouldn't even bother pulling the wheels up, and would get there, then land, and all the drunks would sort of fall out the back. Technology being used to,
The last plane home.
Yeah, the last plane home. But you could, you could have a really good time, quite safe. Actually, while we were there, when we were first there, you know, there was tourists coming to Saigon. I was in a bar with a couple of blokes, and there's this bloke there with his wife and his kids, a pom. And he said, you know, you Aussies have got these Americans fooled. He said, oh, yeah. We found out that they were there on a holiday. They'd gone to the local travel agent in, I don't know, Manchester or wherever, and said, you know, we'd like an overseas holiday in the tropics. And the bloke had said, oh, have you ever thought about Saigon, the Paris of the Orient? No. Well, cheap rates going at the moment. They said they didn't even realise there was a war going on there. And they arrived and, you know, there's all these aircraft with things hanging under the wings and all that sort of stuff. I mean, Tonsanut looked like, you know, it looked like one of these air shows. There's all these military aircraft, and it's the international, Saigon International Airport. And there's all these fighter bombers and helicopters and troops marching up and down, and you know, you name it, it was there. Anyway, there they are in this bar. This guy, his wife, and I think from memory had a couple of teenage kids with them, and they're propped in the bar / restaurant having a meal or a drink or whatever. And so we had a yarn with them and found out that they were there as tourists. And I thought, gee whiz, you've paid to come here. So we're not the biggest dills. But of course, that I don't think there were too many tourists going there after, you know, the first 6 months sort of thing. But I thought that was really strange. The real flash getting into the grog and having a wow of a time was going on R&R out of country. I went to Bangkok. Hadn't been to Bangkok before. And there was a group of 3 of us, and when we're together, when we have these biannual meetings, when I'm there with Tony and Bill, all you've got to say is Bangkok, and we all burst out laughing. It was such a hilarious 5 days we had the time of our lives. I won't say any more.
Tell us a little bit, just a little bit.
You wouldn't believe it. You would not believe what we got up to.
You're just going to leave it to our imaginations, are you?
I wouldn't really like to put it on tape. Talk about plunging the depths of our lusts and appetites. We had a great time. And we toured around the country too. We went up and saw the stumps of the old bridge over the River Kwai, and we went to, I forget the name of the town, the largest reclining Buddha in the world. Went there and put some money into the box just to cover yourself. You know, you've got to make it. It's just another deity of the one God, they tell me. We went to the snake farm and had our pictures taken with a bloody great big python wrapped around your neck and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And we just about drank the hotel. We were in the Crown Hotel. We just about drank the bar dry. We used to almost bath in it. It's great.
And you couldn't get up to that sort of the same level of mischief in Saigon? Did you? Was it only just the 1 day?
You'd only get a 1 day, and you never got an overnight. You know, you'd arrive in there sort of 9 o'clock in the morning, and you had to be on the legal to leave 4 in the afternoon before, you know, so if anything happened, still had a couple of hours of daylight to sort stuff out before, because when it got dark, the boogeymen would come out.
You mentioned, I think off camera, how, you know, with a bar of Dove soap and a packet of Salems, you could win the heart of it.
Yeah.
Did you have? Was there like a girlfriend in Saigon?
I think I got to Saigon 3 days in a year. The rest of I think I had 10 days all up. The rest of my time was 5 days in Bangkok, and you had to go in. Actually, you got a night in Saigon because you had to go in on the morning convoy. We had a hotel. The Australian Armed Forces had a hotel, the Duktan in Cholon, right next door to Australian military headquarters in Saigon. You had to stay there overnight because the flight out to go on R&A is to leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you got a freebie day in Saigon. You had an overnight, but you didn't want to get 2 out there, because if you missed the 6 o'clock flight to go an R&R in the morning, they'd probably send you back out to the field. So you didn't want to miss your R&R. And then when you came back, you'd get back sort of early in the afternoon, but you couldn't go back until you didn't connect up with the return truck in the afternoon. You had to have another night in Saigon to catch the convoy back out in the morning. And if you could work it, you could get another day. You know, make sure you had some sort of business to attend to in Army headquarters, and you'd get another day in Saigon. But at that stage, you were probably suffering so badly from alcoholic poisoning that you didn't really care whether you stayed in town or went back out to Bien Hoa.
So what was the most sort of contact you had with the Vietnamese themselves? Were you dealing with anyone from ARVN, or was it
We
just...
had an ARVN sergeant posted to us, to the company, Sergeant Mead. He was supposed to be our interpreter, etc., but his English was pretty crook. And we were lucky that we had a journo with us, whose name I can't remember, who was quite fluent in French, and we used to go to him. He would speak in French to Neen, who would speak in Vietnamese to whoever we wanted to in Vietnamese, and it would come back via that route. And we eventually ended up with a couple of Australian guys, interpreters, who would, if you needed, you could get them there fairly quickly. Obviously on leave, you'd have a fair contact, but our base area, we didn't let the Viets in there. We washed our own dishes, we washed our own clothes, all of that sort of... The Americans had cheap labour, but, I mean, these people must have been gathering information. We never let them inside our wire. That was it, full stop. If we were doing an operation in a fairly large rural town, a lot of people don't understand, we would take the doctor, we would take the dentist, we would set up a doctor's surgery, and people could come for free, and, you know, oh, I've got a boil on my leg, or pregnant women or whatever, and they'd look after them. Dentist, and the dentist, Christ, what's his name? He lives up with my son now in Bateman's Bay. God, I forget his name offhand now. He wasn't quite sure whether these people were really locals or the local VC or NVA come in to get their teeth fixed. And we used to provide those. A lot of people don't understand. Those things were put on for the locals, the old hearts and minds thing. And you'd have contact with the Viets under those circumstances where, you know, you weren't exchanging shots with them out in the scrub somewhere. There were operations where we operated in built-up areas, in towns. Basically you had to be careful, but if anybody who, you know, if a Vietnamese appeared on the scene who was armed, you would stop right there, sunshine, and get the interpreter. Oh, he's an ARVN or he's a policeman or something of that nature. But you had to be very careful. In fact, I reckon you had to be more careful in the towns than you had to be out in the scrub. Anybody who moved out there outside your perimeter was pretty much fair game, particularly in War Zone D, even though we still followed our rule of if in doubt, don't shoot, but, you know, you see people coming towards you, and you can see, you know, you can pick someone who's holding a weapon in a ready position, the attitude of the body, the way an elbow kicks out, you know they're armed.
It strikes me that'd be, you face some pretty dicey situations if you're going through towns and the potential for being shot at by snipers or that sort of thing.
Never had all that much trouble with that sort of thing. I know one of the programs was to try and open up the roads, to get the roads operating. It was a pretty good road network, but people were afraid to use it. To get the roads open up again, and the engineers would do road rebuilding operations, and we'd provide protection for them. And the Americans at one stage reckoned they were being sniped at from this big tree down the road. And the Americans had these weapons called SPATs, self-propelled anti-tank guns, and they were a 90mm gun, so a pretty big gun, almost as big as that cartridge case there, the gun itself, on a tractor. on a tracked open, just with a front plate on it, and it actually had a steering wheel, not sticks like a normal track vehicle. And these things could do 60 miles an hour. And they used to roar up, you know, they called these things in, they'd roar up, zit, 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 bang, and this huge bang, you know, it's like a big bloody tank gun. And did you get that, sniper? Well, the tree's gone. You know? And that was the only thing that I ever recall about snipers. I don't think that was their method of operating. I mean, they weren't into tying themselves in trees and suiciding and all that sort of stuff like you see in the old movies about the Japanese. They were there to win their war.
But going back to something you said quite a bit earlier, it sounds like you're saying how the Australian Army had learnt some stuff from the Japanese in New Guinea.
Infantry minor tactics, yeah.
Yeah, and but it sounds like the Vietnamese maybe had learnt some of the same sorts of things that you're operating on.
Well,
sort of.
yeah, they could have done. I mean, the Japanese occupied Vietnam during the Second World War. I don't know that the Vietnamese put up all that much resistance to the Japanese. You know, it was another Asian. And they'd kicked the French out, and I think the Vietnamese hated the French more than they hated the Japanese. But I also think that the Japanese occupied the coast, occupied the towns, the major towns, and they didn't really want to go into the scrub, apart from the fact that I don't think they had the manpower at that stage to do that. And a lot of people don't understand. Do you know who took the surrender from the Japanese in both Hanoi and Saigon? The British Army. British parachutists. They took the surrender of the Japanese, and they actually ran the country with Ho Chi Minh for 2 years till the French came back. And the British, when they took the surrender, lined up all the Japanese, gave them their rifles back and said, "You are now the police force." I thought that was pretty good. The old Brits, a lot more rat cunning than our American cousins, I think.
So tell us a bit more about the Americans. I mean, did you have much to do with them other than socially, for example?
Yeah, no, we operations with them. Quite often we would have Americans with us, a couple of three with us, to observe our way of doing it. Sometimes we'd go out and operate with them. A couple of us would go over and over to their area and go out and operations with them. They're the same as people in any other large organisation. Some were good, some were not so good. Same as our guys. They were quite brave people insofar as when we got shot at, everybody was on their guts on the ground, looking for where the shot was coming from and trying to return fire. The Americans would trade shots, you know. They'd run forward and you know, real cowboy sort of stuff. Some of them had quite strange ideas about it all. You'd see them wearing cowboy 6-guns. And, you know, you'd say, "Oh, they look pretty flash. Where'd you get a hold of those?" These were grandpappies. They were genuine from the Old West 6-guns, you know. And I used to, they've got a different approach to life, and they've certainly got a different approach to soldiering. You know, our outlook was that we're here as professional soldiers to do a job. Boom, boom. If we can have a good time and survive it all along the way, well and good. The Americans had, and I'm not sure what it was, but a lot of people seem to think that we're the same as Americans. Badly mistaken. Badly mistaken. They've got a different outlook completely about life. But most of them are good guys, good blokes. They liked us, we liked them. If we couldn't get an item of equipment or some grog or cigarettes or whatever, an American always could. They just had that oversupply of equipment and of everything. They called America the land of the big PX. That was their slang, you know. Taking the silver bird back to the land of the big PX. You know, the tour's up, going home. they were just different. There was a couple of very strange things. Racism in the US Army was really rife. This is in the mid-60s, and you know what was happening in the United States, continental United States. The 173rd had a large percentage of Negroes in it. There were some racial clashes and shooting at each other. It's a bit sad, but that happened on occasion that we know, and I don't know how many other occasions that they kept quiet. But the US Army had been supposedly desegregated by Harry Truman in 1954, but here in 1965 they operated in the field as a desegregated unit. When they came back to Bien Hoa, all the coons, as they called them, would go down and live down at that end of the camp, and all the rednecks would live up that end of the camp. We thought that was really quite strange. But we would get visits from both, and we got along with all of them. You know, it just wasn't in our thing. We had some Aborigines in the unit. We had a couple of Chinese guys in the unit, Australians. Just never worried us.
Now, just because I think we're sort of running out of time, maybe we want to get back into the field and have you tell us about the last operation where you were.
Oh, okay.
So if you can sort of lead us up to that point.
I can even remember the name, Operation Silver City, because it's on that thing somewhere. A big operation. The whole brigade in this particular area, a big search and destroy operation. It was against NVA, Milfit Regular Army, and we'd found, actually one of our companies had found these large caches of rice. They'd built wooden platforms and sacks and sacks, hundreds of tons of rice hidden in the jungle. So our operation was we moved in on foot. It was fairly thick scrub, but rather than destroy this rice, we wanted to get it out and redistribute it back to the local people. It had been flogged, you know, that was the tax they'd collected in lieu of money. Anyway, we'd been going out, my particular platoon had been going out for 2 days, and we'd had a contact each day going out, hitting their sentries and their fairly fluid amount of movement, to carry out chainsaws and to cut down the trees, because we tried getting it out. Have you ever seen these mechanical mules? It's like a little platform, it's like a beach buggy type thing, and it can carry about half a tonne, and it's just got a steering wheel on the front. There's no seat or anything, and you can actually walk behind it and steer it. And Charlie Company had been ambushed and got a couple of guys killed trying to get it out down a track using these mechanical mules. So they said, okay, we'll helicopter it out. And so this location's a couple of clicks away from our main brigade base. So we went out on this particular day, and the idea was that a helicopter was going to arrive with chainsaws. So and we had an engineer splinter team with us, a section of guys who were going to go out, cut down the trees and clear a helipad, and we could get this rice out. Anyway, we got there, we cleared the area, and we're sort of waiting for the helicopter. The helicopter arrived, and it's just offloading the stuff, and I'd sort of walked around, I was talking to one of my blokes, and the next thing, shooting starts, and I'm down on my face on the ground, and I've been shot through the leg, and there's blood spraying everywhere, and I go, oh shit, you know. So I'm firing back. I'm starting to get a bit woozy, I'm losing a lot of blood, I'm starting to think, oh, I'm going to pass out shortly. The fellow I was with, Smithy, he got a field dressing on my leg and stop the blood a bit. We started running out of ammo, and I'm firing an M16, and like a dill, I'm firing it in full burst, and it's overheating and starting to jam. And anyway, and then I get hit again, and I'm thinking, and from behind, and as I was saying this morning, I'm thinking, they're starting to get around behind us, you know, this is not a real good situation. But I've since, as I told you, found that it's one of our bullets that was dug out of me, so, because I was right up forward, so some of our fellows a bit further back were a bit overzealous, it would appear. Anyway, the platoon commander finally got mortars in on the position in front of us, and these guys left the scene. Luckily, there was an American helicopter down at the pad, at brigade headquarters. They couldn't get a dust-off helicopter, but this pilot said, "I'll go and get him." There was still sporadic shooting going on. It came and they got me onto the helicopter, and the entire platoon is there, and I'm saying, "I'm going home." Yeah, mongrel. And it ended up, that was our second last operation. Typical luck, you know, go right through and get zapped on the second last operation. The battalion actually beat me home. I went from there to a casualty clearing station, and if you've ever seen MASH on television, just like that. There's sort of 4 operations going on in the one room, and you know, while you're lying there waiting for the pentothal, you know, and your eyes wide, and, oh my God, you know, what are they doing to that poor bugger? Into the, and that was the 83rd Evac Hospital. Was there for, I suppose, a week. They put me, I had to go back into surgery a couple of times. When they did this leg, some of the tendons had been ripped out, so they joined them up, and I ended up with drop foot, and your foot goes down like that, and you just can't bring it up. And I've got a plaster cast from the ankle to the knee. Anyway, this great hulking Negro medic comes in, and he's got, you've seen looks like a circular saw to cut plaster off. It actually vibrates, but I thought it was a circular saw. And he said, "Hi guy, I'm here to cut your plaster off. They're going to put you back into surgery and fix up the things that's wrong in your leg. They're going to extend your tendons or whatever." And I said, "Not with that, you're not." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "How can you judge the depth of the plaster and not cut me in the, you know, through?" And he's saying, no, it took about 10 minutes, and he's shown me on his hand, you know, he's saying, look, it just vibrates. And finally they cut it off, and off they went. Went to surgery and came out, and they put a bigger plaster on to keep my foot sticking out the way it's supposed to, and all that sort of stuff. So, and the other funny thing was, the Australian ambassador and his wife visited me in hospital, and there was, in this huge ward, it was like a big tented ward, there was 3 or 4 Australians, I can't remember, but one of them was in there with venereal disease. Anyway, they came and saw me after the ambassador and his wife had visited, and she was an absolute darling. When they got to me, I thought it was a bit strange. They looked really flushed, and on there with leg up in traction, and you know, bandages all around me, and the ambassador said, "Oh, it's easy to see what's wrong with you." And I said, "Well, yeah, and I guess you can see what's coming." And they nattered on for a while, and this bloke round the corner, you know, that they'd said, "Well, sort of can't see any bandages, what's wrong with you?" "Oh, I've got the clap." At which point they both blushed and, "Well, we've got to see some other people further up the ward, see you later." So there's a bit of humour in everything, isn't there? But I'm eternally thankful for the American evacuation system, their hospital system, which I reckon you could probably not get anywhere else in the world. The level of professional surgery, and you know, given that it was done almost on a dirt floor, and the whole medical evacuation system, you knew that if you were wounded and they could get you out before really got bad, your chances of survival were almost 100%. From there, I went into Saigon, in the big hospital in Saigon. I was there for 3 or 4 weeks. They sort of like to get you cleaned up and the wound basically healed before you got home. That was it was, a bit touchy politically to have soldiers coming home sort of still bleeding. So the evacuation train was pretty slow. From there, we went to Malaya, which at that stage was sort of forbidden. Malaya wasn't involved in the war, and the hospital at Butterworth was Royal Air Force, and there was Royal Air Force doctors looking after me, and Royal Australian Air Force nursing staff. So I was there for another couple of 3 weeks, till finally I got down to Sydney, and then down to Melbourne. And the battalion had got home about 2 days before me.
So had you known that the tour was it known that the tour was nearly up, or
no,
you didn't know?
No, we didn't know.
Because it wasn't a tour as such,
no,
was it?
The Americans knew that they were doing a 12-month tour, but our latest experience had been 2 years in Malaya, or we're thinking it could be like a World War II situation where you're there till the war finishes. And we really didn't know. In fact, it was just on that operation that information had started coming out that we would be relieved in June.
So what was it like coming home? I mean, apart from the fact that you've got bullets in your bruise.
Oh, it was a big relief, of course, to get home. The girlfriend I had when I went away wasn't there when I came back, bitch.
She heard about Bangkok, did she?
Eh?
She heard about Bangkok.
Not from me. But we didn't realise the depth of feeling about what was happening here. And from Sydney to Melbourne, I'm basically dressed on crutches and getting my ticket to hop on the plane, civilian plane, to come home, get down to Melbourne. There's a couple of us, and we had a nurse was actually escorting us, looking, making sure that we're okay. And there was a little old lady there who said, "Oh, you two are murderers from Vietnam, Bugger off, little old lady sort of thing." And I didn't realise until sort of after a couple of days just how strong the feelings were. In fact, for years after, I was only at year 3 in the army, and I stayed for another 17 years. For years after, I'd go out socialising somewhere, and people would say, "What do you do?" I'd say, "I'm a public servant." Because you'd go to a party or something, someone would say, "What do you do?" "Oh, in the army." "Oh, I suppose you're one of those mongrels," and you'd have somebody starting a fight with you. Bit sad, but there you go. Some you win, some you don't.
And that was even, you came back in 66, is that right? So even then we hear about much later than my times later on, but even then...
Well, later on, when I was at 2RDB at Puckapunyal, bashing Nashos, that was my first posting when I got back. I was there for a year and a half. We used to come down every quarter to pick up a draft from Swan Street, the old engineer depot down at Swan Street in Richmond. And there'd be all these people outside, "Save our sons," the big banners, and you'd get heckled and jostled, and the civilian police would have a guard on the gate to stop them getting in, and it used to get a bit hairy. You'd pick up a draft of conscripts, and on a couple of occasions on the bus, you'd be there by yourself, the only guy in a uniform, with all these conscripts on a bus that you've got to get from Melbourne to Pucka, and it's a sort of 2-hour drive, and you'd get somebody, "I don't want to be here." And, your response would be, "Well, guess what, sport? Neither do I." "What do you mean? It's you, Army." No, it's the government who's conscripting you. We don't want you people." "What do you mean? You don't want us? Aren't we good enough?" Well, I don't know, but I'd rather just get a bigger pay packet and get people who wanted to volunteer. Oh, mutter, 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 you know. But as a general thing, the conscripts weren't bad blokes. They were easier to train than the regular army people in most cases. But and later on, I wanted to go back to Vietnam. I actually went on the advisors course in 1970. Had a posting order, and I've got an 80% hearing loss, high frequency hearing loss in one ear. So I couldn't pass to top fitness on hearing tests. I'd got over the gunshots and all that sort of stuff. And I was ready to go. I was 2 days short of going on pre-embarkation leave, and this bloke on the training team died from a heart attack. He was overweight. So that caused a big flurry, and they cancelled all posting orders of people who weren't FE, as they used to call it. My wife was greatly relieved. I was a bit cheesed off. I'd done all these courses. I'd done a Vietnamese language course. I could speak Vietnamese then. I've still got somewhere the piece of paper, the cancellation of the posting order. Really cheesed me. However,
What would that role have been had you come back?
I was going back to command a company of Indigenous troops as a warrant officer. Very exciting. But maybe it was for the best, because you never know. There was a lot of advisors. Dasher Wheatley I was talking to you about before. He was on the training team. He came down to visit us at Christmas '65. He was a real monster, but everybody loved him. And only a week or 10 days later we found out he was dead. And he'd been with his mate Swanson. They used to always, they never sent you out by yourself. You were always teamed up with someone else, another Australian or another American. So at least you got back to back, and you know, if it got to that situation. And Swanson had been wounded so badly he was dying, and Wheatley wouldn't leave him, and he was killed. Got the VC for it. Doesn't do you much good when you're dead, though.
So you said how on coming back, you know, for a number of years, you wouldn't tell people that you were in public service.
Oh, yeah.
But did there come a
Didn't want
time?
the hassle.
Did there come a time when you were able to just talk about that openly, and people would have attitudes changed? Do you think?
It never really worried me terribly much, because I was still in the army, and we talked about it openly all the time. And I think that's, I know some people who did sort of 6 years, got out of the army, and some of them were in a bit of a bad way. And I mean, I've discussed this with my wife on occasion, and it's her opinion too that it was probably lucky that I was still in the army and you had that comfort zone, if you will. Whereas a lot of blokes out, civilians, and they were ostracised. Poor buggers, the conscripts, I really feel sorry for them, being drafted. But a lot of people don't understand, no conscript was sent to Vietnam. They all volunteered. The government conscripted them, but the army would say to them, do you want to go to Vietnam, or do you want a posting in Australia to do out your 2 years? Most of them said, I'll go on active service.